IB Nation, welcome back to another episode of the Irish Breakdown podcast brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. Happy Tuesday. The week is rolling on, and we have a really fun show geared up for you guys today, and it's a bunch of interesting topics. First part of today's show, we're diving into the senior class, the class of 2023, and going to take a look back at where they were ranked coming into college and an overview of the class, big picture. We're going to have a discussion around if they've lived up to expectations or not, if they've underachieved, overachieved based on their rankings coming out. That'll be a very fun discussion. And then in parts 2 and 3 of today's
they were underranked.
Yes.
Spoiler. We're going to break down why.
Yeah, you guys won't have to wait till the end of that segment to find out if we believe that class is overachieved or underachieved. Don't you worry about that. That is for sure. Part 2 and part 3 of today's show is an interesting discussion. Obviously, as you guys know, this is the time of the offseason when all of the preseason magazines start coming out. Athlon Sports, Lindy's, Sporting News. We had Bill Bender on last week to talk about the Sporting News magazine. ESPN's has came out. Phil Steele's have come out. And so part 2 of today's show, we're diving into just how the magazine in general, how magazines feel about Notre Dame. Talk about where they're ranked in the top 25, plus where Notre Dame's opponents ranked. Talk about the playoff predictions, and then just kind of overall thoughts on how Notre Dame is viewed. And then in part 3 of today's shows, you guys are going to see and notice as we go through how the magazines feel about Notre Dame, there's a disconnect somewhere in that they're very high on the team, but not high on individual players. It's a real interesting spot to be in. So we're going to dive into that in part 3. And Brian already put it in the chat. We are going to have a mailbag today. So make sure to get those questions in throughout the show. Obviously, we prefer the questions to be focused on the topics that we discussed today. You can put MB for mailbag or a mailbox emoji prior to your submission. Obviously, super chats get bumped up to the top of the mailbag once we get that started. But Brian, loaded day today, man.
Yeah, it's going to be a fun show, Trev. This week is going to be a blast. We, as we said yesterday, we've kind of mapped out the summer schedule. Going to have these fun topics. Tomorrow we're going to talk. Obviously, preview Rice. We're going to talk about the 10 best offensive players at Notre Dame in the last quarter century. And then we're going to reveal our all-opponent team and kind of start an opponent thing. So it's that time of year, dude, where, it's really diving into the 2026 season. And there's something you and I have been talking about. Like, the magazines have been very odd this offseason. And that's an interesting topic. And, we're talking about different fun things to discuss. And one of the things we talked about was looking back at recruiting rankings and how much I've in the past kind of railed on how I felt Notre Dame's recruiting classes were underrated. Well, now with some of these classes, we have a chance to kind of look back and say, okay, were we right? Were we wrong? And have some fun with that. So I'm very much looking forward to that, Trev. And that's where we're going to start today is, we'll do the 23 class today. On Thursday, we'll do the 24 class as well as preview this weekend's recruiting visits. And then on next Tuesday, we'll talk about the sophomore class and just where that class is now. Now, keep in mind, when we talk about these senior classes, we're referring to only the players that were signed in the 2023 class. So this could be seniors. This could be redshirt juniors. It won't be transfers. It won't be like fifth-year seniors like Ashton Craig. It focuses just on the 2023 class, and we'll talk about, where the class was ranked. We'll talk about the impact the class has made, what impact it could make in 2026, and whether or not that could change the view. And then, of course, we'll discuss and answer the question, has this class lived up to expectations, surpassed, exceeded expectations, or maybe failed to live expectations? And I think this 23 class is a good place to start because this was Marcus Freeman's first full class. This is the group that was, obviously as the defensive coordinator, he played a role in the 2022 class and then finishing up the 2022 class as the head coach. That was the Benjamin Morrison, Josh Burnham, Jalen Sneed class. The first class that was really primarily almost exclusively put together during his tenure as head coach was this 2023 class. And just looking back and remembering the ups and downs of that class, like a guy that was committed in that class that's currently on the team, it's Keon Keeley. We won't be talking about Keon Keeley today because he didn't sign with Notre Dame in the 23 class. And if he would have signed in the 23 class, that class would have been looked at very differently. You think about losing Peyton Bowen as part of that class and how things have shaken out so far, where he was the big safety everybody's upset about. But the other safety they signed in that class that got underrated is now a captain and a stud and a better college football player than the kid that they lost out on. So it is always kind of fun to look back on that. And we'll talk about guys that have transferred, because I think that when evaluating the recruiting class when it's signed, it's not just the impact they're going to have at Notre Dame. It's looking back at the evaluation and the ranking of the class when it came in. And that's what I think is going to be fun about this recruiting class.
Yeah, without a doubt, man. The 2023 recruiting class is the one that signified to me that recruiting was going to be different under Marcus Freeman. And you can look at the additions of the class. We knew at the time that it was underrated. We can look back now with all the knowledge that we have of the players that they've become, and also acknowledge that this was a very underrated class. And when you dive into who was in it, you understand why. Talking about a class that had Charles Jagasaw and Jeremiah Love and Boubacar Traore and Cooper Flanagan, Armel Mukam, Christian Gray, Drake Bowen, the list goes on and on. This is going to be a class that anchors this year's football team, one that we are all extremely high on. Not just you and I, the two guys sitting on this side of the screen, but as you guys are going to find out when we dive into the magazines, we're not the only ones that are very, very high on this Notre Dame team. And the 23 class is playing an absolutely massive part of that.
And I think that as we go through these recruiting classes, and we talked about the underrated nature of the classes, I think that ties into the third segment of today's show as well, of why certain players continue to be overlooked. But when you look at this 2023 class, Trevor, obviously this is a class that we've talked about. This is the class that, as you mentioned, had this is basically, it was Kenny Minchie at quarterback. You had Jeremiah Love at running back. Your receiver classes: Jaden Greathouse, Braylon James, Rico Flores, KK Smith, and Jordan Faison. He wasn't a scholarship player, but he was somebody that Notre Dame recruited to play football also. You had Cooper Flanagan at tight end. You had Charles Jagasaw, Sullivan Absher, Sam Pendleton, Joe Wadding, and Chris Terek as offensive linemen. Boubacar Traore, Armel Mukam, Brendan Vernon, Devin Houston were the defensive linemen. Drake Bowen, Jaden Alsbury, Preston Zinner were the linebackers, and the DBs were Christian Gray, Micah Bell, Adon Schuler, and Ben Minnick. So they signed basically 23 players plus Jordan Faison. And when you look at it, Trev, what I like is there's still a lot of this class is left, and some of the guys that have left got degrees. Kenny Minchie, I believe, left with a degree. I believe that KK Smith left with a degree. I believe that Ben Minnick left with a degree. I believe Preston Zinner left with a degree. So a lot of those kids that have left with degrees, and left because they just got beat out by better players, as opposed to there was some issue. There were some guys that I think that we missed on as well. Like Micah Bell would be an example of a guy that we missed out on. But when you evaluate this class, Trev, and you think about just who this class was and where it stood and how it ranked and all those type of things, I think the first thing we'll do as we look at it is restate the premise that we had at the time, and say at the time we felt this class was vastly underrated, and that there were a lot of players being underrated, and that we felt at Irish Breakdown at the time that it was a top 5 caliber class. And so then as we look at it, okay, has it panned out as such? And what's interesting is some of the top players in that class have actually not been the ones that have panned out so far. So when you look at the class, Trev, and you look at where it was ranked, first and foremost, this class was ranked, the outlet that ranked it the highest was ironically ESPN. They ranked this class 7th. On3 ranked at 9th. Rivals ranked at 10th. And shocking here, the group that had them ranked the lowest was 247 Sports. I know that's going to throw you guys way off. Like, you're going to be super shocked by that. But they had them 12th. Looking at some of the more detailed data, there was only one top. ESPN had them ranked the highest, but ESPN had 0 recruits in the top 50. 247 and Rivals only had one guy in the top 50, and that was the same guy for both of them. It was Charles Jagasaw. And then, actually, no, Rivals had, Rivals had somebody different in the top 50. Rivals had Drake Bowen as their top 50 player. They're the only one that got Drake Bowen really, really right, in my opinion. On3 had 2 players in the top 50 in that class. You had Charles Jagasaw was the number 25 overall player in the class, and then Braylon James, ironically, was the number 50 player in the class. So as I mentioned, some of the higher-ranked guys in that class didn't pan out. Braylon James was also ranked 60th by ESPN, and a guy that I was very high on. And so then you look at top 100 players, ESPN had 5 top 100 players. On3 had 4 top 100 players, and it was the 2 we mentioned, plus Jeremiah Love and also Christian Gray. They had, and then Rivals had 3 top 100 players. It included Brennan Vernon, Drake Bowen, and Christian Gray. And then 247 only had 2 Notre Dame players in the top 100, Jeremiah Love and it was Jeremiah Love and Charles Jagasol were the 2 top 100 players in that class. So you look at 4 stars versus 3 stars. 247 had 19 of the Notre Dame players as 4 stars, which is ironic. They were tied with Rivals for the most 4 stars in the class. The problem was a lot of their 4 stars were lower ranked, whereas Notre Dame had 10 top 150 players according to On3 and Rivals, 13 by ESPN. They only had 7 in the top 150 by 247 Sports. So they had a lot of guys that were in the top 250 or outside of the top 250. On3, ironically, had Notre Dame higher ranked, but then had a lot of Notre Dame players ranked low. They had 8 of the players were 3 stars in the class, and had 16 of their players did not rank inside the top 250 of their ranking. So it was kind of a bit of a mixed bag. ESPN had the fewest players outside the top 250, and I only counted top 250 just so we could have some consistency. Like ESPN had, they had Cooper Flanagan ranked 292, so he was technically in their top 300, but I only counted the top 250. So when you look at this class in 2023, it is kind of interesting to look at it and see how they had it broken down. And there was only 1 5-star period, and that was Charles Jagasol in this class. I think the lack of 5 stars is something that you could look back and say that they weren't that far off on that. So far, I think the only guy that you could look at and say that's played like a 5-star is only one, in my opinion, so far, and that's Jeremiah Love. I think that's an obvious one. Where I think that they have clearly missed the boat is the lack of top 100 talent. 247 only had 2 guys in the top 100. Rivals only had 3, On3 had 4. And I think that's when you break down this class, Trev, that they clearly missed the boat when evaluating this class.
Yeah, without a doubt. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to look at a talent like Jeremiah Love and be like, yeah, he's going to be really good. I'm with you completely. Where they missed the boat are on guys like a Don Schuler and Drake Bowen and Jaden Osbury and Christian Gray to a degree, and players like that really missed the boat on what their true upside and what their potential is, because those outlets, like we've talked about before, their total ranking is, if I'm understanding this correctly, they combine the upside in their current grade, whereas Irish Breakdown separates the two. And that's where a lot of these outlets miss the boat. That's where we're talking about this class being underrated. Not pounding our fists on the table saying that, yes, we believe this is a top 5 class and ESPN had them at 7th. That is outrageous. 247 is outrageous, because I don't know how you look at that class and say it's not a top 10 class, but
all of them but ESPN are ridiculous.
Agree.
The 9 through 12 was at the time way too low for this class. And honestly, the frustrating thing for me, where I think some of this got wrong, is that there was just a refusal to re-rank certain players, no matter how good they were as seniors. There was a refusal to re-rank Jeremiah Love because he had already committed Notre Dame. There was a refusal to re-rank Drake Bowen by some of them. Now, Rivals jumped Drake because Drake Bowen had a monster senior year at Andrean, just a monster senior year. And Rivals jumped him up. Rivals had him all the way up to number 48. But you look at the rest of the rankings, ESPN had him pretty good. They had him number 78. But then you look at 247 and On3, they didn't even have Drake Bowen as a top 200 player. That's like the equivalent of a 6th round draft pick, maybe. Because when you put other classes in there, that probably bumps him to 7th round draft pick, potentially undrafted free agent. And you say, well, if Drake Bowen is properly evaluated, then I think that changes things a little bit. If Jeremiah Love is properly evaluated, even the ones that liked him, nobody had him ranked super low. Rivals had him outside the top 100 at 129. On3 had him at 79, 247 had him 96, ESPN had him 94. Those aren't bad rankings, but there just was a refusal to recognize how dominant he was as a senior, how he dominated, other guys that were ranked higher, and just that refusal to move him up the rankings despite that breakout senior season. As I mentioned, same thing when I'm looking at at Drake Bowen. So, I mean, to the fact that you could have Drake Bowen in a class where he was not one of your, I don't know, top 5 to 6 players in the class it was always a little bit nuts to me. You look at On 3, they had him as the 7th best player in the class. You look at 247 Sports, and they had Drake Bowen as the 9th best player in the class. It was a very odd ranking. There is one player that was ranked, I think, relatively appropriately by most of the services, but he hasn't panned out because of injuries, is Charles Jagasol. He was ranked 25th by On3, 46th by 247, and 66th by ESPN. Rivals had him at 166. Well, now, obviously, they're closest to being right because he hasn't played a whole lot. But I think anybody that's watched Charles Jagasol play in the very limited snaps he's been on the field knows that the talent, the evaluation was right. His career hasn't panned out because of how he's performed, but the ranking was, to me, was spot on. I think where I looked at like 247, for example, and you just look at their rankings and just some of the absurdity of it, they were also right on some. I think they got Boubacar most close to being right. They had him at number 141. They had Cooper Flanagan ranked higher than anybody else, right? So, like, look, I'm going to throw shade at an outlet. I got no problem doing that, but we also need to be willing to admit that they got some of them right. They don't rank every Notre Dame player lower than everybody else. They had Armel Mukam ranked number 191 overall. So far, that hasn't panned out, but I think that has a chance to change, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. They did have Christian Gray a lot lower. On 3 and Rivals had him as a top 100 player. 247 had him at number 203. I think Christian's been in between those. I don't think he's quite played consistently enough to look to be that of a top 100 player, but I think he's a borderline to top 100 when you look at some of the production he's had in Notre Dame. Kid finished 5th in the country last year in passes defensed per game. That's breakups and interceptions. That's a pretty good season for what we all considered a disappointing season. They had Ben Minnick ranked in their top 250. Micah Bell ranked number 237 overall, was higher than everybody except ESPN. And then they had Devin Houston ranked as a 4-star, number 247 player in the country. Only ESPN had him ranked higher. Here's where they got a little bit nutty. They didn't have Jaden Greathouse ranked in their top 250. They didn't have Jaden Osbury ranked in their top 250. They didn't have a Don Schuler ranked in their top 250. Those were just flat out bad rankings, in my opinion. And their 3 stars were Christopher Tarrick, Sam Pendleton, KK Smith, and Preston Zenter. I think Sam Pendleton has proven to be a 4-star player. The rest of those I have no problem with. And so I look at 247, for example, and I think there was some of that just, okay, you guys are clearly missing the boat on those. When you look at Rivals, they didn't have Boubacar Traore in the top 250. They didn't have Cooper Flanagan in the top 250. They didn't have Sullivan Absher in the top 250. They didn't have a Don Schuler in the top 250. We'll talk more about him here in a little bit. And then ESPN only had him number 249, and On 3 didn't have him in their top 250 either. They had him at number 269. I think when we start looking at the individual players, that's going to be one that we're going to talk about. But so when you look at the class and the impact it's going to have, right? So we went through the rankings. There's been one truly elite player so far, and that's been Jeremiah Love. Now, there have been other players that have elite moments, elite stretches, but that doesn't make you an elite player. So, look, Larry Brown had a 3 interception performance in the Super Bowl. Timmy Smith rushed for over 200 yards in the Super Bowl. They were elite that day. They weren't elite for the rest of their careers because within 2 years, nobody knew who Timmy Smith was anymore. But he's been the only one so far that's been elite. I think the fact that he was missed as much as he was, I had him as a top 50 player, 4.5-star player. And the point was he had some things to work on, but it was very clear that he was a top 50 recruit coming out of high school. But nobody was willing to rank him as such. You look at the impact this class is going to have on offense in 2026. There's 4 guys that are projected to be starters in 2026. When you look at this Notre Dame class, obviously that number would be higher had Jeremiah Love not been the Doak Walker Award winner and the number 3 overall draft pick.
Right.
But you look at Jaden Greathouse is likely to be a starter. Jordan Faison is likely to be a starter and the team's leading receiver. Cooper Flanagan is likely to be a starter. Sloan Absher is likely to be a starter. If there are injuries, Joe Wadding then steps into the starting lineup. And so then that's 4 starters of your defense or on your offense. So over 33% of your starting lineup is expected to be that. And then when you look at last year's class, Trev, you had that group. You had Absher started for half the year. You looked at Jordan Faison and Greathouse were starters early, but Faison was there. And then you had Jeremiah Love of an offense that set a Notre Dame record in points per game. I shouldn't say a modern record, most points since 1913, I believe, and then set a program record in yards per play. Big part of that was driven by this class. Your best player overall was from this class. Your best receiver overall was from this class. And I'll say this, if not for injuries, this offensive class would have been a way more impactful, because you'd have Charles Jagasaw balling out. You'd have Cooper Flanagan playing a lot more football last season, if not for an injury. You'd have Jaden Greathouse putting up different numbers last season. So I think injuries have kind of tamped down the overall production top to bottom, but it's still outstanding production when you talk about Notre Dame's a team that has gone 24-4 the last 2 years. Your two best receivers during that stretch are from this class. Your unanimous All-American is from this class. And your offensive line has been impacted from this class. Sam Pendleton started for parts of the 24 season. Sullivan Absher started for half of last season. Joe Otting started for half of last season. Charles Jagasaw started in the championship game, played well, had a huge impact in the semifinal game against Penn State. So this class has certainly been impactful so far in their careers for Notre Dame on offense.
Without a doubt, they're going to need him to continue to be this upcoming season. Like we've talked about ad nauseum throughout the offseason, Notre Dame is one of the favorites on FanDuel to go out and win the national title this upcoming season, and they're absolutely going to need these offensive guys to play this way. To your point about injuries, there are so many more players that could potentially have made an impact here. If it wasn't for the unfortunate, way that Charles Jagasaw's career has been so far, he'd be on this list. I'd be very interested to see if Cooper Flanagan, here's an interesting conversation, if Cooper Flanagan would still be on this list if it wasn't for the injuries. Most likely, I would say that he would have been. I think he would have came back for his senior year, which would have been this year, but it's an interesting conversation nonetheless. But this side of the ball, like I said before, the foundation of Notre Dame's offense this year is going to come from this 23 class. That's for sure.
No question. And then defensively, even more so. This is the side of the ball where I think, Trev, you've had the greatest impact depth-wise, and where I think this class was most underrated. And when you look at just the starters that are going to be from this class, you're going to have Boubacar Traore up front. You have Drake Bowen, Jaden Osbury, Christian Gray, and Adon Schuler. Almost half of your starting lineup are guys from this class. Your two returning captains, your two-time defensive captains. This will be the first time, I believe, in the Marcus Freeman tenure he's going to have 2-year captains, both from this class. These are also impact players. Adon Schuler is a preseason second-team All-American on Lindy's. Drake Bowen is, I think, third-team on Phil Steele. Sporting News had him as a top 50 returning player in college football this year. Obviously, Boubacar Traore is a guy that's getting some first-round NFL draft pick projection. I think Lindy's had him as the 9th best returning defensive end in college football. And then, obviously, Christian Gray at corner. I believe Lindy's had him as the number 11 returning cornerback in college football this season. And as I mentioned, ranked 5th last year in all of college football in passes defense per game. Then I look at a guy like Armel Mukam, who is also battling. He hasn't impacted yet, but he's battling to be in the starting lineup. He started in the spring. I don't think he'll stay in the starting lineup, but I expect him to play. So when I look at this class on defense, Trev, this is where I think this class has had the most impact from a volume standpoint. Nobody has impacted this team like Jeremiah Love. Nobody. But there's more impact players so far on defense from this class than we've seen from the offense. Because I would say Jeremiah Love is the only true impact player for an entire season from the offensive class. Jordan Faison is very good. He's had some impact moments. I don't know that I would put him on the same level as like what we've seen from Adon and Drake so far, or even Boubacar for that matter, when you look at where his production comes from. Jaden Greathouse has had some impact moments, but he hasn't been that impact player start to finish in the season the way that Adon has, the way that Drake has, the way that Jaden Osbury has, the way that Boubacar Traore has. So even though the best player came from offense, and you've got plenty of production coming back from offense. Your leading receiver in 2024 was from this class in Jaden Greathouse. Your leading receiver in 2025 was from this class in Jordan Faison. You look at the level of impact production we've gotten from this class. Your leading tackler the last 2 years is from this class. You know, a guy you've got a 2-year starter at cornerback from this class that's been part of a 24-4 team. Jaden Ausberry, arguably the most underrated player in the entire roster from this class. Your stud defensive end from this class. I think that's where they missed the boat. But you look at it, Boubacar Traore was only ranked in the top 200 by one outlet, 247 Sports, ironically. He was ranked 291 overall by On3, ranked as an unranked 4-star by Rivals. Now, here's where it gets interesting to compare his ranking to mine, because I had Boubacar ranked low in my class. I think it was like 10th or 11th on the defensive class because he was raw and hurt a lot. So to some degree, I don't hammer them for where they ranked Boubacar. I don't. He would have ranked in the top 100 to 150 for me if I combined the two rankings, because he was also my number one upside player on defense. Because it was like, look, he hasn't played a ton of football and he was hurt most of his senior year, and he's still very raw. Loads of talent, but the production isn't there to match a top 100 ranking. So I don't bash them for ranking Boubacar. That's where sometimes a guy like him can drag your class ranking down, and you look back and say, boy, that was a miss, but it really wasn't, in my opinion. I don't bang any of them for not having Boubacar higher. I think 291 is too low when you factor in the upside. I mean, I would have him higher. I think 222 is too low. 141 is closer to where he should have been. Having him not in the top 250, in my opinion, on Rivals was bad. But I don't think that's where I think people missed the boat. The guy that I think people vastly missed the boat on, and we said it then, and I'll say it again now, is a Don Schuler. And he never got the love he should have got. Rivals had him as a 3-star. 247 had him as a 4-star unranked player. ESPN had him at number 240, and On3 had him at number 269. That's the one guy that I can confidently say, without a doubt, everybody missed on. You can't say Rivals missed on Drake Bowen. On3 did. 247 did. I think Rivals nailed Drake Bowen. They had him at number 48 overall. Nailed it. That's about where he should have been. A Don Schuler being ranked no higher than 240 and being a 3-star by Rivals, way off. And I think his career has shown that, easily has shown they missed him big time. And we thought then that this is one they're going to look back and say, boy, we screwed that one up.
And it's one that they should currently look back on and say that they screwed it up. He's going into his 3rd year in the starting lineup. He's going to be a 2-year captain. But when I look at the 23 class's impact on defense as a whole, Brian, there's 4 guys on here that we talked about could break out into national stars this season. Could. Boubacar Traore, Drake Bowen, Christian Gray, and Don Schuler. I don't count Jaden Ausberry. I think he's going to be a fantastic player for Notre Dame's defense. I just don't know what he could do this season to become that national star, like nationally recognized player. Notre Dame fans are going to recognize him by the end of the season. If they haven't already, they absolutely need to take notice. But Jaden Ausberry is underrated in the Notre Dame fan base. I'm not really willing to get into the discussion of how he's viewed nationally yet. Wouldn't surprise me if he was in there either. But what do we talk about on national championship contending teams? You need star power. You need your dudes to be dudes, your studs to be studs. Like whatever innuendo you want to put in there for this upcoming season, Notre Dame is absolutely going to need those guys. And the 23 class is home to a lot of them on defense. Offense, to varying degrees, I think so. But they can go out and have a championship caliber offense without Sullivan Absher playing like a first-team All-American.
Correct.
They can go out on offense. And I mean, look, fact of the matter is I love Jaden Greathouse, and I'm very excited to see what he does. But they set a program record, modern-day program record in passer rating, points per game, and yards per play, and he played in 4 games and had 4 catches. Anything that you get with Greathouse is gravy on top, and I think we're going to see that this year. But I would contend that you won't have a championship caliber defense unless guys like Boubacar and Drake Bowen and Don Schuler and Christian Gray rise to the occasion. Their impact on defense is going to be huge.
I agree with that. The one caveat that I will say is that if the 23 class does play to its potential on offense, this team becomes very hard to beat.
Oh, yeah.
If Jaden Greathouse can be the consistent player, like we're having a discussion with Archer in the chat and saying, like, has he really played like a top 250 player outside of 2 games? Well, number one, I think we need to stop saying that because you're acting like those 2 games were regular season games against like Navy and a 2-10 Florida State team. We're talking about the national semifinals and the national championship game. Those are pretty important games to have your best career games. I'm just saying. So, like, we need to not do that. He was the leading receiver that season. And there's a conversation to be had about, look, a receiver's job is to get open. You can't throw yourself the ball. At the same time, there's a counter argument to that, which is also fair, which is there comes a certain level where you're so dominant that you demand the football and the quarterbacks throw you the ball. That hasn't happened with Jaden Greathouse, which is fair, and he's got to stay healthy. That's another thing he hasn't done. My point is not to debate, was he ranked properly? Was he not ranked properly? We haven't raised that discussion in the show. Oh, Jaden Greathouse was underrated. He hasn't proven that he was underrated yet, in my opinion. You know, he was ranked appropriately, 107 by Rivals, 164 by On3, 122 by ESPN. So far, that's a fair ranking based on what he's done at Notre Dame. My point is if he plays like the top 100 player that we had him as coming out of high school, that has a major impact on this offensive football team. To go with just Jordan Faison repeating what he did last year. And then the caveat to that is if Charles Jagasaw ever comes back and is the player that he can be, he has the kind of impact on this offense that you're talking about on the defense with that class. But I just can't spend a lot of thought, mental bandwidth thinking of what Charles Jagasaw might do as a senior. Like, we'll see. We'll see. But to your point, like a lot of these guys on offense, dude, looking at Sullivan Absher, just be who you were. Just be, that top 250-ish caliber player, 4-star, and just be that guy. If you're that guy, well, if all the recruiting services get you right, you're a good football player. You don't need to be that guy. Let Gerby Lambert be that stud. Let Anthony Knapp be that stud. And we'll talk about those guys on Thursday. And so, I think that, but to your point though, Trev, if you don't, that's more of on the offensive side. If those guys do this, then things go here. To your point, things are here on defense, and the only way it stays there is if this class does what they need to do. I think that's absolutely spot on, and I think there is a level for this group still to take their game to another level. There's another level for Boubacar to take his game to. There's another level for Drake to take his game to. There's another level for Christian to take his game to, and to a degree, I think. With Adon, it's not that there's another level to take his game to. It's just about clean up some stuff for Adon. That's the big thing. But when I look at the defensive class, Trev, I do think they're going to look back and be like, yeah, we really had a lot of misses on defense. The fact that On3 didn't have Jaden Ausberry or Drake Bowen in their top 200. They had Adon Schuler at 269, Boubacar at 291. I think we're going to look back and be like, yeah, you guys missed the boat big time on these defensive players. And that was our argument at the time. These are the guys you missed on. It's the defensive class that people clearly missed on. That's kind of my issue.
Those are 100% the biggest areas that they missed. I'm with you completely. I don't know how you can look at a player like a Don Schuler or Drake Bowen and rank them outside of the top 250 like a lot of the outlets did. We'll see. We'll see what they end up doing. Shout out to Rivals for ranking Drake Bowen properly, but they're going to have a big impact on this season no matter what. Cool thing about college football this year and with the 2023 classes, we're going to see other players also have an impact as well across the country, not just in South Bend, members of the 23 class. I think about Kenny Minchie, who's stepping into the starting role at Kentucky, an SEC school. Mm-hmm. Now I think about Rico Flores, who's going to be a starter. I believe he's at Virginia now. They're in the midst of a quarterback battle, but he's going to be a go-to target for them. Sam Pendleton's a starting offensive lineman at Tennessee.
Had a solid year last year for them.
Yeah. He did. Very excited to see what he does going into year 2 with the same team. I think he's going to take off. KK Smith at Michigan State, we talked earlier about how, he kind of adds an element to that room that they don't currently have. Kind of unlocks a different aspect of their offense.
I just want to remind people too that Sam Pendleton was a starting guard in Notre Dame's 2 biggest regular season wins of 2024. And had the best game of his career so far. still to this day, was against Texas A&M in that opener. He was really good in that game. So, he had an impact at Notre Dame, and I expect him to have one at Tennessee. And then you mentioned Ben Minnick at Miami of Ohio. He's a guy that was interesting. He's one of those guys that the staff actually liked him a lot early on. He just couldn't stay healthy. And that was a big issue for Ben. He just kept getting banged up. He couldn't handle the rigors of playing at this level physically. Wanted to, effort was there. He was one of the fastest DBs they had. He just couldn't physically hold up. And I'm very curious to see what he does. Micah Bell's, I think, at Georgia now. He obviously is not going to pan out. That's one that I got wrong. I liked Micah Bell a lot. I think I had him as a top 100 player. I have to go back and look, but I think I had him as a top 100 player. I got that one definitely wrong. You mentioned Preston Zinner is going to be starting at Rice. Who Notre Dame is going to get to face? KK Smith, you mentioned at Michigan State. Notre Dame will get to face him. So I think that's an interesting piece of this too, Trevor, is Notre Dame's going to get a chance to play a couple of the guys that from this class that have transferred. Notre Dame's going to get a chance to play him this year, which I think is interesting. And another guy that we all missed on in the class, Braylon James, is a guy that we missed on. So the recruiting services missed on him. I don't think any of us got his talent wrong. I think there were other things about Braylon James that were limiting for him. Work ethic, attitude. I think he wanted some things handed to him. He's gone to TCU and hasn't played either. So, I mean, that's just the reality of where they are.
And then obviously you mentioned wild card of the class is going to be Charles Jagason. He'll remain to be the wild card until his future starts to unfold. I'm to the point where I can't even put a prediction on it. And I respect the questions that come in. We get them in Biso Holds and Friday Free for All mailbags. And I don't want to not answer them to be disrespectful. It's just I can't give you an answer. I don't know what it's going to look like for him. It's very interesting with him.
Yeah. Yeah, no doubt, Trev. And so when I look at this class, I do like the transfers. I like the defensive class is impactful. I think the offensive class is going to be more impactful. The Jagasol piece is interesting. It's going to be a very interesting dynamic to this. Before we jump into the final question, I think one interesting aspect of this is ESPN had this offseason re-ranked the 2023 class. And so they went and looked back, which I actually respect this, where they go back and say, hey, this is where we ranked the class, but here's now that we know certain things, here's where they are. And they had Notre Dame number 2 and Ohio State number 1. Interestingly, Notre Dame and Ohio State were 7 and 9 coming out of that class on ESPN. They had Notre Dame 7, Ohio State 9. And on the re-rank, they had them first and second. I'm actually looking at it now. They had Ohio State number 1. They were 9th that year. Notre Dame is number 2. They were 7th that year. They had Miami number 3. They were 5th that year. Georgia number 4. They were 2nd. Texas number 5. They were 3rd. Oregon number 6. They were 8th. Texas A&M number 7. They were 13th. Alabama number 8. That class was ranked number 1 overall. So I think when you look back and you see, okay, clearly there's a lot of these teams that were ranked high have been good. Going from 7 to 2nd doesn't mean that you stunk as a class. But I think what it shows is you missed a lot of guys in that class for how good they were. You clearly had a lot of these guys ranked high. You look at ESPN, for example, and as we mentioned, ESPN had this class ranked higher than anybody else. They had 5 top 100 players in this class. Jaden Osbury, Braylon James, Charles Jagasaw, Drake Bowen, Jeremiah Love. I don't think any of those guys are misses outside of Braylon James. I think we can all agree that injuries have kept Charles Jagasaw from being a top 100 player, but when he was on the field, he was very clearly a top 100 player when he played. He just couldn't stay healthy. But the other guys I think have panned out, but it's more of Jeremiah Love shouldn't have been number 94. He should have been number 24 at worst, and Drake Bowen was 78. Maybe he should have been closer to 50. You had Greathouse 122. I'm good with that. Christian Gray 145. I think he's played like higher than 145. I think when you look at like Boubacar 222, I'm fine with that, but he's outplayed that. Adon Schuler 240, highest anybody ranked him. He's played higher than that. Cooper Flanagan 292. I mean, he hasn't been healthy enough this past year. Last year was going to be his chance to kind of be that guy. Sylvan Apps was a 4-star. He's outplayed that. So I think it's you had a lot of guys somewhat right, but they've all gotten a lot closer to their ceilings, which I think says a lot about the development that this staff has been able to go through with a lot of these players. And then, of course, Jordan Faison was not ranked, and then he's turned out to be a top, at least top 150 caliber player so far, at least. And I think that's been where it's been impactful. But I like that they do that. I think I got a lot of respect for that, because it'd be very easy to be like, oh, well, you know, hey, look, we had this Ohio State number 9, they ended up being number 1. Yeah, respect that. We had Notre Dame number 7, they ended up being number 2. And I like reading through the explanations, of Cardinal Tate, and then obviously Luke Montgomery was a starter on the team from that. Arvell Reese was in that class. Cade McDonald was in that class. Jermaine Matthews was in that class. And then they talk about, obviously, the Notre Dame. They talk about Drake Bowen, Adon Schuler, and Boubacar, and those type of guys. So I do like the fact that they were willing to go back and say, hey, here's what we got right, here's what we got wrong, basically, and do a re-ranking. And give the former ranking, because you could just do a re-ranking, and we're not going to tell you what we had teams before. We're just going to wear on the re-rank. So I appreciate that. So as we kind of wrap up this segment, Trev, and we look at it, I think we've kind of already said where we are, but has this class lived up to expectations, met expectations, surpassed expectations, or underachieved and failed to live up to expectations?
Based on what the ranking of this class was coming into college, they've absolutely surpassed the expectations that were in front of them. They are performing much higher than the 9th rated class from On3, much higher than the rivals' 10th ranked, and obviously clearly higher than 247's 12th ranked class in the country. There is no doubt about that they've surpassed that ranking, in my opinion. And I think the room for growth is even higher. The one thing that's interesting about the re-ranking with Ohio State is some of those guys are gone. Like Lincoln Kineholtz, the quarterback of that class, is gone. Same thing with Notre Dame and Kenny Minchie. Arvell Reese has gone to the draft. You could go, kind of toe-to-toe with him and Jeremiah Love, who's gone from Notre Dame's class. But there's a lot of people left Notre Dame's 2023 class. You could make a case that there's still a lot of room to grow for this class, and they're already overachieved, in my opinion.
I agree. I think even just as we look at it today, if everybody just kind of does what they've already done, but just 1 year older, I think it's clear that this class has exceeded expectations for what the national services have had them at. I will say this, though, but for me, they have simply met expectations. They have not surpassed expectations yet for me. I think when you look at them being ranked 12th by 247, they far exceeded expectations. 10th by On3 or rivals far exceeded expectations. 9th by On3 definitely exceeded expectations. And even ESPN number 7, they've definitely exceeded expectations. As ESPN has pointed out, they have now number 2. I viewed this as a top 5 class, and I think so far it has played like a top 5 class. The question is to exceed expectations for me. So when I say that they've only met expectations for me, they haven't exceeded it, that's not a shot at this class. That's more of I just had higher expectations than them, so them surpassing those people's expectations meant that they met mine. If they met expectations by ESPN On3 and 247, then they would have failed to meet my expectations as a top 5 class. For them to exceed my expectations, because you nailed, it's very clear this class has exceeded expectations from the national recruiting standpoint. Totally agree with that, Trev. You nailed that analysis. But for me, and where I had them, for them to exceed expectations, we do need to see Jaden Greathouse or Jordan Faison, if not both, take that next jump. We need to see Drake Bowen take that next jump. Adon, clean up your game. Boubacar, take that next jump. Go from being a third-round draft pick caliber player that was underranked to a first-round caliber talent that was way underranked. We need Jaden Osbury to keep doing what he's doing and even continue to grow his game a little bit more. We need an Armel Mukam, in my opinion, to finally become a key member of the rotation. And the guy that I would argue needs the most kind of jump from on defense is Christian Gray, who's shown big-time production at times, but has just struggled with consistency. So I love what this class has done. I want to see it to raise expectations or exceed expectations, that's what I need to see. I also think I'm very curious to see when you look at how the class was as it came in. It's not just the Notre Dame players that I want to see step up. I had Sam Pendleton ranked as a top 150 player. He's been solid so far, hasn't played like a top 150 player. I had Kenny Minchie as a top 100 player. I don't think that I could say he hasn't lived up to that, because unfortunately he was sitting behind a guy that I had as the top 25 national player, quarterback. This year will tell us if we got the Kenny Minchie evaluation right or wrong. I think that's a part of it. I liked KK Smith coming out. This will be his chance to prove that he's kind of that kind of player. So I think it's not just the Notre Dame kids that have a chance to show that this class was underrated and overachieved by others, but then also exceeds my expectations. It's going to be, I do need to see a jump from some of these guys this season. And if they do it, then this team will be very hard to beat. If they just continue to play to my expectations, they are what we said they were when we evaluated them, not from a recruiting class, but just from a team impact thing. Remember we said when we broke them down before the spring, when we did sort of a senior, junior, sophomore class evaluation, then it was more from a here's the impact they're going to have on the team, not from a looking back at the recruiting rankings, but more of a here's where they are now moment. And it was, this is the heart and soul of the team. This is your captains. This is your leading receiver, your leading pass rusher. Like, this is the heart and soul of your team. There's maybe more star power in the 24 class, which we'll talk about on Thursday with CJ Carr and Leonard Moore and guys like that. But this is the heart and soul. This is where your captains come from. In a lot of instances, this is where your steadiness comes from. And that is what we expected this class to be. There's been some impact talent, but it was the depth of talent that I liked about that class. And that's what they have a chance to show this season. If they simply just continue to live up to my expectations of what I thought they would be, they will be what we talked about a couple months ago. They will be the heart and soul of this team as far as like leadership, toughness, clutch playmaking, things like that. Their best player on offense won't be from this class. Their best player on defense won't be from this class. But they're like, second, third, fourth, and sixth or something like, what I mean, could be from this class. So that's what I think makes this class interesting. But that's kind of what we hoped it would be when it signed. I still say if Charles Jagusah can somehow get back to playing football again, that changes things quite a bit. It really does. I'd say him and Armel Mukram are the two biggest wild cards. If you had to pick one on offense, one on defense, the two biggest wild cards that could maybe go the longest. I think you could kind of throw Jaden Greathouse in there because of the injuries last year. Those three are the ones that ultimately could really change the narrative about this class.
Wasn't Luke Talich in this class too as a walk-on?
As a walk-on. That's a good point. Yeah, it's a good point. Yeah.
Yeah, he's another player that adds to the ceiling of this class.
I viewed him. I should have added him, to be honest with you. I should have added him. Yeah, because he actually got on the field sooner than Jordan Faison did as a freshman. So, yeah, we should have included Luke Talich on this. And that only adds to it. It adds even more value to it. He's been a starter on special teams for now. It'll be his fourth year as a starter. He was in the rotation at safety a little bit last year, finished third on the team in interceptions with 3. And then obviously, caught a 70-something yard, 80-something yard touchdown pass last year against Stanford and is going to be in the 2 deep this year. Very important piece of the defense this year. It's a great point. Luke Talich only adds to how impactful this class has been.
Brian, up next here on the Irish Breakdown podcast, brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. Like we said earlier, the preseason magazines, we're at the time of the offseason where the preseason magazines start rolling out. Phil Steele, Athlon Sports, Lindy's, ESPN, Sporting News. And we're at a time when Bill Bender was on last week to talk about the Sporting News magazine. And Notre Dame has been a hot topic of discussion with a lot of major outlets. ESPN has been talking about them a lot this offseason, a bunch of different reasons, talented roster, playoff snub, all those things. All the offseason storylines that we love to hear about. And so in part 2 of today's show, what we're going to do is kind of dive into how the magazines feel about Notre Dame. We are two guys under the belief that Notre Dame is poised to have a very, very strong season. And we've been saying, it's like, hey, guys, we're not the only people that think this. And now that these magazines are starting to roll out, that's becoming even more and more true.
Yeah. I think when I look at Notre Dame and I look at the magazines, this is one of the weirdest years I've ever seen. And the weirdness we'll get more to into part 3. But I've paid a little bit more, kind of looking at different aspects of the magazines this year. And the one thing I've started to see is I think there's some of these magazines that are very high on Notre Dame. It's this weird balance between the two, where on one side, I think you have some magazines that like Notre Dame a lot as a team, but they're not willing to put them higher because they don't want to be wrong. Although 2 had them at number 1, which will kind of one preseason, one postseason. We'll get to. There's a couple others, Lindy's being one, that I don't think is very high on Notre Dame, but they don't want to be wrong on the other end. It's like Lindy's has Notre Dame number 4, and then everything else they say about Notre Dame does not support them having Notre Dame as a top 5 team. And it's like even these little stupid petty shots about, since Notre Dame won't join the conference, here's all the teams that have won a title since they've last won a title. It's like, this is retarded. Did you do this before the 2021 season with Georgia, who was on a longer streak of not winning a title than what Notre Dame is on? You know what I mean? And it's like, it was petty and childish. Clemson was on a longer streak than Notre Dame is on by a year. Ohio State, prior to their championship in 2002, was on a non-title streak that I believe was longer than the one Notre Dame is currently on. You never heard anything about that. It's always Notre Dame, Notre Dame, Notre Dame. And so I think those are aspects we look at. But there were some interesting aspects to this, Trev, as we dive into this. But I just thought it was very clear. You could see it easily, the magazines that actually like Notre Dame more, but they're not ready to pull the trigger with them or some of their players, which we'll talk about in part 2. And then there were some where it was clearly like you're ranking them 4th and giving them a bunch of backhanded compliments. And you don't really think they're 4th. You're going to give us the whole, their schedule is this, and they're really not that good of a team. Like Lindy's has Notre Dame 4, I believe, because they think their schedule is garbage. Despite the fact 3 of Notre Dame's opponents are ranked in the Lindy's top 25, that's a different story for a different day. It was so bizarre reading all the different analysis of Lindy's, not to mention the fact that you clearly have different people working on different parts of the magazine that don't pay attention to each other. Like there was whoever did the top draft prospects had Kingston as the number 2 linebacker, but then whoever did the position rankings had him as the number 11 inside linebacker. There's some weird stuff in Lindy's, man. Like I bought every other magazine for you so we could look through these. And Angela was at the mall last week and she saw the Lindy's and she bought it for me. And I was like, Trevor, I'm not buying you this. I'm not spending money on this. I'll send you what you need for this magazine, but I'm not spending money on this. It was the most bizarre. Like they've always been kind of had this little weird shots at Notre Dame, but this year it was very odd and also very obvious that they don't think Notre Dame's that good. They just don't want to be wrong about them, so they were unwilling to put them lower. And then a lot of their ranking of them as number 4 is more about the schedule, the lazy, the schedule's weak type of stuff than it is like, hey, we think this is a really good team.
For some outlets, it was a rough magazine season. I got my ESPN magazine in yesterday, right here, bang. And my first 8 pages all look like this. In case anybody was wondering, it's still the right side up. So it's been an interesting year it's been an interesting offseason to dive into what these offseason magazines are saying. But, we're here to evaluate it and talk about it and where they have Notre Dame ranked. And that's kind of where we're going to start this discussion is, at the top, there are some outlets like Lindy's that only rank Notre Dame because it's the popular thing to do right now. Because one thing that I will say, out of all the magazines that we listed off, Notre Dame is in the top 5 of every single one of them. Phil Steele, ESPN, Lindy's, Athlon Sports, ESPN. Notre Dame is a top 5 team. They're 5th or higher. And you could have a strong argument case that they shouldn't be 5th, but it is what it is. But they're all to varying degrees high on Notre Dame for one reason or another outside of what you laid out with Lindy's. And it's interesting to talk about how these outlets view Notre Dame. That is for sure.
Yeah, I think so. When we kind of go through it, Trev, what we're going to do is we're just going to give you each outlet. We'll give you what their ranking was, how they ranked other Notre Dame opponents, and then we'll run through the playoff aspect of it. So now the one that we'll look at first didn't actually have a preseason top 25. I mean, they had a preseason top 25, but they did not do a playoff prediction. And I talked to a buddy of mine, and he said that he hasn't done that in a while. So when you look at Phil Steele, that's where we'll start things off, Trev. So Phil Steele has two rankings, and it's always been very confusing to me, but he's always had two rankings. One is this power poll, which is what he says is this is how good I think teams are, basically, is the explanation. It's not a projection of, like, let me just try to find it because it's very hard to explain. So he goes into, like, most of the thing he writes about is him explaining what the power poll is. So he says a number of years back, before computers became part of the BCS rankings, et cetera, he says during magazine time and throughout the football season, there are many 15 to 18-hour days put in and blah, blah, blah. When they invited me to join the poll, I wanted to give them the best set of power ratings in the country to help make the poll as accurate as possible. The dilemma I had was which set. As I mentioned throughout the magazine, and I have 9 sets of power ratings that are based on different factors. For example, one is based on individual talent and performance of each position and each blah, blah, blah. He goes, what I decided to do was combine all 9 into one rating, which gives me a very solid overall ranking for each team. The rating takes into account every factor, using it as my main set of power ratings. These numbers differ from plus minus. He goes, as mentioned earlier, these numbers will differ from my top 40 because the power poll is concerned only with the strength of the team and does not factor in who they will play for the upcoming season or how many games they should win in 2025. I think it's very clear to understand that. That's the one that basically says this is how good this team is, independent of whatever their schedule or record might be. In that poll, he has Notre Dame number 1. His top 10 is Notre Dame number 1, Oregon 2, Georgia 3, Ohio State 4, Texas 5, Indiana 6, Oklahoma 7, Ole Miss 8, Miami 9, USC 10. There's only 2 that I strongly disagree with, and that's 8 Ole Miss and 10 USC. I just do not get the USC love. We'll talk about more about that. He's got Michigan 14th, Washington 15th, South Carolina 16th, BYU 17th, Tennessee 18th, Penn State 19th. He has LSU 21st, SMU 22nd. Hey, look, we've talked about LSU's got to do this and they got to do that and they got to prove this, they got to prove that. In no universe, in power ranking, projection, in anything, can I understand how someone could have Penn State ahead of LSU. I just don't get that one at all. But anyway, he does have 3 Notre Dame opponents in the top 22. He's got Miami at 9, BYU at 17, SMU at 22. Looking at I think the next Notre Dame opponent is going to be way down. And it would be, let's see here, still going, Wake Forest. Notre Dame does not play Wake Forest this year. North Carolina at 60 is his next best opponent. Then he's got Michigan State at 63, Purdue at 65, Syracuse at 67, Navy at 69, Stanford at 70. But it's got Notre Dame number 1. Then his other ranking, he has this kind of his top 25, which is based on the other things, right? It's who is, who you play, your schedule, all that kind of stuff. He has Notre Dame number 1 there as well. Georgia 2, Ohio State 3, Texas 4, Indiana 5, Oregon 6, Miami 7, Alabama 8, Texas Tech 9, BYU 10. He's got USC 11 and SMU 12. So he's got 3 Notre Dame opponents in the top 12 of his preseason rating. Because they're not his power rankings. These rankings take into account the totality of the circumstances that I feel each team will face in the 26th season, such as strength of schedule, foes' schedules coming off buys, experience edges at the start of the year, and so forth. He says my top 40 is where I project teams to finish in the final rankings or have always done quite well. And so This one, the other one, okay, cool. Notre Dame's the best team. You think they're the most talented team, most experienced, whatever. This one is interesting because Notre Dame being number one has a lot to do, in my opinion, with how he views Miami, BYU, and SMU. He basically has Notre Dame beating the number 7, number 10, and number 12 teams in the country. And I think that's a big factor as to why he has Notre Dame number one in this ranking as well. And he's got Navy 20. So this is a very different ranking than a lot of people because he has 4 Notre Dame opponents that they will beat in the top 20. If Notre Dame has 4 wins of teams ranked in the top 20, including 3 in the top 12 by the end of the year, Notre Dame will be the number 1 ranked team. And I don't care. The only exception would be is if Ohio State's schedule is as good as we think and they go undefeated, or Texas's schedule is as good as we think and they go undefeated, or LSU's and they go. I mean, it's going to take some team going undefeated against a crazy schedule, because that is a crazy schedule. That's 4 teams in the top 20, 3 in the top 12, 2 in the top 10, one of which is on the road. That it would be a no-brainer make Notre Dame the number 1 team in the country. At worst, the number 2 seed in the country. I just don't see a world in which Texas and Ohio State both can't be ahead of Notre Dame in this scenario. That's kind of how I look at it. So he is very high on Notre Dame, very high, but also has some weird position rankings. He has the receivers ranked 34th behind Michigan, which I found bizarre. He's got their running backs ranked 20th, but then he has, I believe, he has his view of Notre Dame. A lot of it comes down to, Trevor, is he thinks their offensive line is going to be elite, and he thinks that their defense is going to be elite, because he has the Notre Dame defense this year with, let me find it here real fast. He has their I got it pulled up over here. Where's it at? I think he has their linebackers number 1, their DBs number 1, and I think their D line was like number 4, 5. And so that's where a lot of that stuff comes from when you look at his rankings.
Yeah, I think Phil Steele is expecting Notre Dame to be like the stereotype Notre Dame team, just like on steroids. Insane defense, built around the trenches, strong run game, and he's expecting it to be like 2012 or, degrees of 2020, maybe 2018, minus the passing game. It's very interesting to see how he views them. But he is the highest that I've seen of Notre Dame's 2026 schedule, ranking Navy and BYU. It's the highest I've seen somebody rank SMU.
Yeah, it's the highest I've seen anyone rank BYU. It's the highest anyone's ranked SMU. Even more so SMU, because a lot of people have BYU in like the 13 to 17 range. This isn't a huge jump for BYU. It is a big jump for SMU, who I think the highest I've seen anyone have SMU is like 20 to 23 is usually where they are. And then Navy at 20 is obviously a big one. Miami 7-9 is kind of where most people have Miami. So that one's not a whole lot different. But basically, if you have Miami at 7 and BYU at 10 and SMU at 12, you don't see those teams losing to anybody but Notre Dame. Maybe they catch one more loss. Maybe. Navy at 20, you don't have them losing to anybody else. I don't see how you can have Navy there with 2 losses. So I thought that was very interesting, Trev. Phil Steele's very high on Notre Dame. Now, he does not, unfortunately, do a postseason prediction, unfortunately, like the others do. It probably would have been not any dumber than some of these other ones, but he does not have that. So let's go next to ESPN, which you guys are this is going to be an interesting conversation. We'll save the most interesting part for the very end, Trevor. Well, let's dive into where ESPN has Notre Dame and their opponents ranked.
Yeah, ESPN is falling in line with Phil Steele, and they have Notre Dame ranked number 1 overall, I believe, in their rankings. They're not number 1 overall, 4th overall.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
It's the end that we'll get to.
It was the part of my magazine that is cut off and upside down.
Yes.
So my apologies.
It's all good. It's in the notes.
They have Notre Dame ranked 4th. They have Miami ranked 7th. They have BYU ranked 11th. And then they have SMU 22nd, which is what we were talking about before. where like we normally see BYU and SMU ranked, that's within the range that we've normally seen. There's no Navy that's ranked, unfortunately, for their schedule, but this is what ESPN has fallen in line with. They believe Notre Dame to be a top 5 team, and then the 3 premier teams on their schedule, being Miami, BYU, and SMU, are also all ranked inside of their preseason top 25 rankings.
Mm-hmm. I thought that this was they were also on the higher end with a couple of the Notre Dame opponents compared to others. Miami at 7 is about as high as I've seen Miami in a preseason top 25. Maybe somebody has them. Actually, no, it's 7, 7, 7, 7. It's like right where everybody has Miami at 7. That was a consistent one. I think Phil Steele also had them at 7. Literally every magazine has Miami number 7. This was the highest that anybody other than Phil Steele had BYU, because Phil had him at 10, they had him at 11, and then SMU at 22. This is tied for 3rd highest. So SMU's about where, and the 3rd highest is Phil Steele had him 12. Everybody else had him 22, 23, 20, and 22. So kind of like right in there. But Miami and BYU, they think are going to be pretty good. My whole thing is if Notre Dame, if Miami's 7, BYU's 11, and SMU's 22, then one of 2 things happen. Miami beat Notre Dame and lost to somebody else or to somebody else, or Notre Dame beat them all and that's their only loss. Either way, like I don't know that 4 makes a lot of sense with that. I think they'll either be lower than Miami, or like Miami's not going to be 7 with 2 losses. So either A, you have Notre Dame beating Miami and that's their only loss, and then they're 4th and Miami 7th. Or you have Miami beating Notre Dame but losing to somebody else. And in that case, would Miami be ahead of Notre Dame just for the same reason we talked about last year? It was a little bit odd. But anyway, still, they have 3 of those teams in the top 11 and then SMU 22. Here's where it gets interesting for ESPN. So here's their playoff matchups. They have 5 USC versus 12 of Hawaii. 6, and they have USC winning that game. They have number 6 Texas A&M beating number 11 Oklahoma State. They have number 7 Ohio State losing to number 10 Texas, which I found fascinating. So they have Ohio State number 7 probably beating Texas in the regular season and then losing so you're going to beat Texas on the road. Clearly you have Texas with 2 losses. That's why they're 10 with that schedule. So you have Ohio State probably beating Texas on the road in the regular season, but losing at home to Texas in the playoffs. Okay, whatever. But you have, and then you have number 8 Miami losing to number 9 Oregon. In the second round, they have number 1 Indiana losing to number 9 Oregon. Little rematch there. Then you have number 2 Georgia beating number 10 Texas. That makes sense because Georgia has Texas has yet to beat a team that plays like Georgia does. Then they have number 3 Texas Tech beating number 6 Texas A&M, and then number 4 Notre Dame beating number 5 USC. Let me just say this about their rankings. I appreciate that they didn't go chalk here like everybody else for the most part did. They have 2 upsets in the first round, and then they have an upset in the second round. Now, not as many upset in the quarterfinals as we've seen the last 2 years, but you and I have hinted that we don't think this year is going to be as much of that upset because we do think there's some teams at the top that are just better than what the top teams were in college football the last couple of years. But in the semifinals, he has number 2 Georgia beating number 3 Texas Tech, and he has number 4 Notre Dame beating number 2 Georgia. In the national title game, ESPN has number 4 Notre Dame beating number 2 Georgia. ESPN's preseason magazine has the Notre Dame Fighting Irish winning the national championship. I was floored when I saw that. Floored. I think I shouted because I didn't see it till after when you and I were on after the show yesterday, because the magazine had come right before, and I was looking at the very back of the magazine. It's like they don't even hype it up. It's literally the second to last page of the magazine, Trevor. And it's like this little side article right here. It's their playoff predictions. And I was floored by that. Floored by that.
It makes up for the fact that they put USC as a number 5 seed in the college football playoffs this year. But I was shocked.
Who gets beat in the quarterfinals by number 4 Notre Dame.
Which I love. The only thing that would have made that even sweeter is if the game took place in South Bend, but I'm never going to be upset about Notre Dame beating USC anywhere, any place, anytime.
That's right.
But
that's right.
With that being said, I was happy to see it. I mean, we've talked a lot about how every team sees Notre Dame in the top 5. They view them being a playoff contender. They have the best odds on FanDuel right now to make the college football playoffs, which, I get all of that. And it doesn't take a rocket scientist to be like, yeah, they'll probably make the playoffs this year. For ESPN to predict them to win it all, that was shocking. Now,
and beat Georgia and beat Oregon.
Yes.
That was interesting.
I was very shocked to see that play out the way that ESPN had it played out. Now, we could have a fun debate, which I'll save for now because I always give credit where credit is due, and shout out to ESPN for kind of following suit with what we believe how the college football playoff is going to go. I would have to imagine that if they had like Texas winning it all, they wouldn't have put it in the back of the magazine on one of the last pages. But different conversation for a different day. That was one of the more surprising ones. And I'm glad you said it. Shout out to ESPN. Didn't think I'd be saying this much today, but shout out to ESPN for also not going chalk on their playoffs.
Yes.
Just a disclaimer for anybody that's thinking about doing a magazine ever in the future, ever. If you just go chalk with your playoff predictions, don't put it in the magazine. That's stupid.
Just have your rankings.
Just have your rankings.
And just give your field. Here's the field.
Yes. Give your field, talk about some potential exciting matchups. If you're just going to go chalk, then just don't even, who cares, man? But
let me make that note for my support. If you make a magazine, okay, make sure to not go chalk on predictions. I'll note that, Trev. If I ever do publish a magazine, I will make sure not to do that. Thank you for that little note. I don't agree with all of their rankings, but and who they had in, but I thought that was a good one. I'll tell you this, Trev, that'd be a very entertaining playoff. That would be the best first round of playoffs that we've seen. I think if Oklahoma State makes the playoffs this year, then that means they're an entertaining, high-scoring team going up against Texas A&M and Mike Elko. The Ohio State-Texas rematch, I think, would be easily the best TV ratings ever for a first-round game, and I don't know if one ever surpasses that. That's the two biggest TV markets, like the two biggest TV draws in college football right now. I mean, literally. Last year, literally, and it wasn't close, was, I believe, Texas and Ohio State, if I remember correctly. That game would be massive. And number 8, Miami against number 9, Notre Dame, and Oregon would also be a huge game. And then you have second round, if Indiana gets Oregon, Georgia versus Texas, Texas Tech versus Texas A&M. I love that A&M's getting two like old Big 12 rivals in the first 2 rounds. And then Notre Dame, USC, that would be the most watched quarterfinals ever. And it wouldn't be close if we get those kind of matchups. Georgia, Texas Tech would not be a big draw. Notre Dame, Oregon would be. And the Notre Dame, Georgia title game would be a massive draw because the whole SEC would be tuning in. A lot of the SEC just chose not to watch the title game in 24. That's why the ratings weren't great. They didn't want to see 2 northern teams playing each other. If Georgia gets in there, it's going to be do this one for the brand is what it's going to be. You're going to have SEC fans all over watching and rooting for their conference to win it all. And I thought that was very interesting, Trev. Very, very interesting. Let's move over to sporting news. They had Notre Dame actually ranked lowest in all the preseason rankings at 5. They had Miami 7, BYU 15, Notre Dame and SMU 23. BYU at 15 likely means they have a couple of losses. And so that obviously would ding Notre Dame a tad. I didn't have a whole lot of issues of having Notre Dame 5th. It's lower than I'd have them, but as you and I have said, you have them anywhere in the top 5. I'm not going to beef with you on that.
100%. As long as you're within the ballpark, I think Notre Dame is going to be anywhere in the top 3. Personally, I've been consistent with it since the pre-spring. I've ranked them as my number 1 team. But if you have them somewhere in the top 5, I'm not going to pound my fist on the table and say that it's blasphemous. If somebody has them outside of the top 5, I'm just not going to take whatever your ranking is seriously because you cannot name 5 better rosters, 5 better teams, 5 better coaching staffs than what Notre Dame has. Simply just can't.
Agreed.
You would need way too much projection outside of that. But again, this is kind of following suit to what we've seen typically with BYU and SMU. SMU especially, most outside of Phil Steele's has been somewhere in the 21 to 25 range. that I've seen
Yeah.
with them. BYU has fallen smack dab in the middle of the range of like that 11 to 17 anywhere that I've seen them in there. But yeah, it's interesting. But I'm not too upset with what their rankings are. And then as far as the playoff goes, this is one that I believe went chalk.
No,
I think
Sporting News did not go chalk.
Sporting News
Not
did
completely. Not
Okay.
completely, no. They had a couple upsets. They had one upset in the first round, one upset in the second round, and an upset in the semis.
I see that.
They didn't go a lot of off chalk, but they didn't go. The only one that went pure chalk, well, the last two went pure chalk, which was super lame.
Again, one of the upsets that you're talking about in the playoffs is USC. Again, like
Yeah.
I just don't get. I need somebody that knows ball relatively to explain to me what it is about USC, of why they think they're going to be a top 10 team and a team that, according to Sporting News, can make somewhat of a run in the playoffs. I need somebody to explain that to me. Don't talk to me about what Lincoln Riley did at Oklahoma. Don't talk to me about what Caleb Williams did that one year, that one time, that one day, that one night. Don't talk to me about how they had
because
Jordan
even
Addison
that
who
team
transferred
couldn't
in
make
for
the
Pitt.
playoffs, Trev, because they choked at the end of the season.
100%. I want to know what it is about this USC team that everybody thinks that they're going to just be this play. Are they just the fun team to say is going to be the dark horse this year? I need it explained to me because I just don't see it. I don't.
I think a lot of it is the group think and buying into the hype and just everybody has it. Here's their matchup at Sporting News. Texas, number 5, Texas over number 12, Boise State. They have number 6, Oregon beating number 11, BYU. They have number 7, Miami losing to number 10, USC. And they have number 8, Ole Miss beating number 9, Oklahoma. So one upset. Then in the quarterfinals, they have number 1, Indiana beating number 8, Ole Miss. They have number 2, Georgia beating number 10, USC. They have number 3, Notre Dame beating number 6, Oregon. And they have number 5, Texas beating number 4, Ohio State. So this is the second magazine that we've talked about, 2 out of 2, that has Texas beating Ohio State in a rematch in the playoffs. Again, that would be the most watched quarterfinal game, and it wouldn't be close. But it's interesting. So I also thought it was interesting that you have Notre Dame preseason number 5, but number 3 in the rankings. I thought was pretty interesting there, where it shows that, hey, this is where we think teams should be ranked preseason, but it doesn't necessarily mean where we think teams are going to finish. I appreciated that because I think that there is a difference. Then in the semifinals, they have number 1 Indiana beating number 5 Texas. Then they have number 4 Notre Dame beating number 2 Georgia. Second magazine that has Notre Dame beating Georgia in the playoffs, deep in the playoffs. And then, of course, they have number 1 Indiana over number 4 Notre Dame. Although Bill said he wanted to pick Notre Dame over Indiana, but he was vetoed, because they said they want to have the number 1 team, which to me is like, if you have them number 1 and you want to pick them, that's fine. But then don't have teams differently ranked in the playoff projection than where you have them in the preseason rankings. Have Notre Dame 5, have whoever, Oregon, Texas, whoever ahead of them, and then just go about it that way. It didn't make sense to me to have it that way. So it is what it is. But so I thought that was interesting. Sporting News is interesting. So 2 magazines both have Notre Dame playing for the title. Keep that in mind when we get to the final section of the show. Let's go to Lindy's. We won't spend a lot of time here because their magazine was just terrible. Guys, if you have not bought Lindy's yet, don't. Save your money. They had Notre Dame 4th, Miami 7th, BYU 15th, SMU 20th, and Navy 46th. Here's their playoff. Number 5, Indiana beats number 12. They went chalk. So they went 5 Indiana over 12 Boise State, 6 Georgia over 11 Texas Tech, 7 Miami against 10 USC, 8 LSU beats 9 Ole Miss. They also went chalk in the next round. They have number 1 LSU beating number 2 Texas, number 3 Ohio State number 1 Oregon beating number 8 LSU, number 2 Texas beating number 7 Miami, number 3 Ohio State beating number 6 Georgia, and then number 4 Notre Dame beating number 5 Indiana. So only gave Notre Dame 1 win, but it's over Indiana. And then they have number 1 Oregon beating number 4 Notre Dame, and then number 2 Texas beating number 3 Ohio State. So far, all 3 magazines have Texas beating Ohio State in the postseason as the lower seed, which I find fascinating.
Yeah.
And then number 1 Oregon over number 2 Texas, which is just lazy chalk. Stu Athlon, Trev, similar deal. They have Notre Dame 4, Miami 7, BYU 16, SMU 22. It's basically right in line with where everybody else has them. There's very little difference between. This is why I keep saying I think a lot of this is just follow the leader. It's just nobody wants to be wrong. Their playoff is number 5 Indiana against number 12 Boise State. 3 of the 4 have Boise State as the 12th seed. I thought that was interesting. The only other one has USC. Then they have number 6 Oregon beating, because they went chalk as well. Number 6 Oregon over number 11 Texas Tech, number 7 Miami over number 10 LSU, number 8 Oklahoma beating number 9 A&M. In round 2, number 1 Ohio State beats number 8 Oklahoma, number 2 Georgia beats number 7 Miami, number 3 Texas beats number 6 Oregon, number 4 Notre Dame beats number 5 Indiana. Let me just say this. That would be one heck of a semifinal. A lot of these semifinals would be really good. Texas and Oregon, Georgia, Miami, Ohio State, Oklahoma. That would be one heck of a quarter. A lot of these quarterfinals are interesting. Lindy's was Oregon and LSU, Texas, Miami, Ohio State, Georgia, Notre Dame, Indiana. I still think probably the best would probably be the ESPN quarterfinals would probably be the most entertaining.
Agreed.
Then their semifinals is again chalk. Number 1 Notre Dame, Ohio State over number 4 Notre Dame, number 2 Georgia over number 3 Texas, and then they have number 1 Notre Dame beating, or number 1 Ohio State beating number 2 Georgia. That's the only one that didn't have Ohio State and Texas playing each other, and then Texas beating them. So they have Ohio State winning it all. So I thought it was very lazy, like you said. Just if you're going to do a prediction that's going to just go chalk, just put here's the matchups. We'll see you in December. Don't give me this lazy. What are the odds that every higher seed wins in a tournament that's 4 rounds? Come on. And this is a tournament, Trev, where last year the playoff was the semifinal was number 1 against number 6. No, number 1 against number 5. And then number 6 against number 10. And then the previous year, the championship game was number 7 versus number 8. And the semifinals were 6 versus 7 and 5 versus 8. And yet now we're just going to go chalk. That's lazy. You want to have the number 1 team win it all? That's fine. But don't give me no upsets whatsoever in any round. That's lazy. That's very, very lazy.
Not going to convince me that it didn't happen. Or that it won't happen. No upsets will happen. You're not going to convince me of that.
In a tournament that's been driven by upsets, 7 of the 8 higher seeded quarterfinal teams have gotten beat so far. But yet this year, 2 magazines think it's just going to be chalk. I think it'll be closer to that than what we've seen in the past. But again, no upsets whatsoever in the first 2 rounds, period. Come on, man. Come on. It's lazy. ESPN did the best of all the teams when it comes to the playoff rankings.
Yeah, they did.
And they had a 1 first round upset. Actually, they had 2 first round upsets. They had number 10 Texas beating number 7 Ohio State, number 9 Oregon beating number 8 Miami. Those aren't giant upsets, but those are the kind of upsets we're going to see in the first round. We won't see a lot of 12s and 11s with upsets right now. Then they have number 9 Oregon beating number 1 Indiana. And then, so I thought that was interesting to have that upset as well. And then in the title game, they have 2 versus 4, and they have 4 winning. So I thought that was interesting. It's not even about Notre Dame winning at all. It's about it's just not going to be every higher seed wins. So just don't be lazy. Take your shot. It's fun. It's a preseason magazine. Have some fun with it. And ESPN's the one that had the best. And only had 1 SEC team in their semifinal. I'll be honest with you, I was a little surprised by that as well. I expected it to be a 3-team SEC field. Kind of what I was
just expecting. ESPN puts out a playoff where the semifinals are LSU, A&M, Bama, and Georgia.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. And this makes a little bit of sense. The guy that did the predictions was Bill Connolly. You guys know I have my issues with his SP Plus formula, but I always felt like he tries to think and predict and evaluate, not just be lazy and take the chalk. So I thought that was interesting. Very, very interesting. So that's where they had them. I thought that was a bit interesting. I'll say this, Trev, as we wrap this up. I'm with you. I just don't get the USC love. I don't. Look, the Oklahoma State going from what they were last year to winning the Big 12 is a stretch, but it's the Big 12. It wouldn't shock me.
100%.
It wouldn't shock me at all. Texas beating Ohio State in an upset. I'm shocked that like everybody but one had it, but it wouldn't shock me if it happens. It's tough to beat a team twice in the same year. It is. Even at home. If you get that game at home, it can be tough to beat a team twice. So, I mean, I get that. I don't necessarily agree with it, but, it is what it is. It's the USC being the number 5 seed by ESPN, the number 10 seed by Sporting News. They were the number 10 seed by Lindy's. The only outlet that didn't have USC in the playoff was Athlon. And if you look at Phil Steele, didn't he have USC like 10th? Like he had USC high in both of his polls, which again, I look back and I'm just like, I don't get that. He has USC 10 in his power poll, and then he has USC number 11 in his preseason top 40, which means he has them making the playoff. Because, barring some crazy situation like last year, which I don't see happening. Because last year still would have been crazy because you'd have had 8-5 Duke in instead of who was the 11? Tulane was the 11, and then 12 was James Madison, correct? Or was it the other way around?
No, James Madison was the 12. That is correct.
James Madison would have been bumped last year, and then Tulane would have still been 11, but Duke would have been 12. So it's same garbage. USC would have got bumped. So barring that, USC, everybody has USC in except for Athlon, and I just don't see that.
I don't either, and I don't know what's more blasphemous, putting them at 5th, but then losing to Notre Dame in the quarters, or having them at 10th and beating Miami, which would just be a terrible matchup for USC.
Yeah.
I know they don't have the offensive line that they had last year, but I have to imagine that Mario Cristobal is going to get those boys ready by December to be shored up in the trenches. I don't know if they haven't watched any of the Notre Dame USC games from the last couple of seasons, but Lincoln Riley does not like getting hit in the mouth. Lincoln Riley-led teams don't like getting hit in the mouth in the trenches. I need some, and I'm being dead serious, taking my Notre Dame hat off and changing my IB t-shirt to just a plain old black t-shirt.
Mm-hmm.
I need somebody to explain to me what it is about USC that people think that they are a top 10 playoff team. Legitimately. This is a call to action. Like you can find me on the message boards. I'll blast out my email, my Twitter. Like it's just, I need somebody to explain it to me because I don't get it.
Yeah, Andrew Gilmore said that it could just be that people think Gary Patterson is just this great defensive hire. And I'm like, Gary Patterson has not been an assistant coach or has not coached in college football since 2021. He hasn't coached at all. He's been a special assistant one year, a consultant another year. That's it. So 22, 23, 24, 25. He's only been involved in college football at all for 2 years. And now he's going to take over as the defensive coordinator. And that's lead us to believe that that's the magic potion for TCU or for USC. Let's not forget that the last time that Gary Patterson was a head football coach as a defensive-minded head coach, his team gave up 34.9 points per game. In the COVID year, they gave up 24 points a game. In 2019, they gave up 26.4 points per game. They gave up 23 in 2018. They gave up 33.6. 19 in 2017. Not since 2017 has Gary Patterson been involved in a football team that gave up fewer than 21 points a game. And he's going to go to USC and just all of a sudden miraculously turn that program around. In year one, I do not see it. I do not see it. Like you can say, well, what about Chris Ash? I mean, Chris Ash hadn't coached in that similar time. And look, fair, but Chris Ash walked into it, don't screw this up scenario, and still kind of screwed it up. And then the defensive head coach said, we ain't doing that anymore. Lincoln Riley ain't doing that, number one. Number two, he's not walking into it, don't screw this up scenario. They had a good defensive coordinator last year and a good D-line coach and a good secondary coach that he got rid of basically all of them, essentially. So, and last I checked, Lincoln Riley's still their head football coach. I don't get it, dude. I really don't get it. That's the only one of these, like, wow, you've got that team in the playoffs. That's the only one that I had. Again, Oklahoma State, I'm not going to pick Oklahoma State to be in the playoffs, but wouldn't shock me. You brought this up yesterday in the Bice a Hold, Trevor, like when we were talking about, K-State being a perennial, and you're like, dude, there is no such thing in the Big 12 so far. I mean, we just haven't seen that in a while, especially since Oklahoma and Texas are gone. But even then, Texas wasn't a perennial contender in the Big 12. The only perennial contender we've seen in the Big 12 the last 10, 12 years is Oklahoma. That's it. And they're gone. They're not there anymore. So, and didn't Oklahoma State go like 3-9 one year and then play for the Big 12 title the next?
Yeah.
Under Mike Gundy. So that wouldn't shock me. That wouldn't shock me much at all. So I thought it was interesting. Oregon had a very unique range. A lot of people have them in the top 5, 6, but they don't have them in the top 5, 6 rankings.
Yeah.
They were a 9 seed in one. They were a 6 seed in another. They were number 1 in another. Like, there's a lot of range for Oregon and 6 in another. So they went from 1 to 9. What's interesting is the team that the magazine that had Oregon 9 had Oregon going to the semifinals, getting beat by Notre Dame. That was the ESPN, which I could see happen with the way that their schedule is. I could see Oregon being 9th or 10th and then actually making a run. That actually might be better for Oregon, going with a little bit of a we got to prove it attitude.
Yeah.
So the USC thing, though, bro, I'm with you. I do not understand. Do not understand.
Brian, we're in for a fun discussion here in the next part of the Irish Breakdown podcast, brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. And the previous segment, we kind of set the stage for this discussion. We're talking about the preseason magazines and where Lindy's and Phil Steele and Athlon Sports and ESPN and Sporting News all have Notre Dame ranked. And basically the premise is Notre Dame is thought of highly. They're highly ranked by all major outlets. They're at least the 5th best team in the country in their preseason rankings. We just got done talking about where Notre Dame falls in the playoffs, and they're a semifinal team in every single playoff prediction.
Single one. And the only magazine that doesn't have a playoff prediction has Notre Dame ranked number 1 in their preseason top 25 and in their power poll.
Correct. And ESPN has them winning it all. And Sporting News has them in the title game.
Yes, 2 magazines have them in the title game. Yes. I mean, as a team, Trevor, there's a lot of love for Notre Dame in these magazines outside of Lindy's, as we kind of talked about. But like Phil Steele, number 1 team. ESPN, number 4 seed, likely undefeated, but not a strong schedule outside the top 2 to 3. But they have them winning it all. Sporting News has them as a number 4 seed and playing for the title. One of the writers for Sporting News said, hey, if it was up to me, I'd have picked Notre Dame to beat Indiana. And so you look at that and you're thinking, well, man, Notre Dame's going to win going to have a lot. This is going to be their most All-Americans that they've ever had based on that, right, Trev? Because if you look at recent seasons and you look at where Notre Dame has kind of been in recent seasons, it's like, well, man, like based on that, it would make a lot of sense for Notre Dame to be a preseason top 5 team, for Notre Dame to be a team that's going to, go out there and play for a title and do all these type of things. It would make total sense that Notre Dame is going to be going to have a great year when it comes to All-Americans. Don't you think?
You would think. Based on the playoff predictions, based on national position unit rankings, people that put Notre Dame secondary first overall, their linebacking core first overall. I've seen their receiving core in the top 10. Athlon had them in the top 10, I think at 9th. Their offensive line has been ranked in the top 10. I've seen their defensive line ranked in the top 10. So to your point, with those position group rankings, national unit rankings, combined with how they see them playing in the playoffs, yes, you would think that they would have several All-Americans.
You'd think, but then, let's look real quick at some of the past All-America teams that Notre Dame's had, Trev. You look at in 2022, Notre Dame had 4 players that were first or second team All-Americans and I'm just talking about on the main Big Five. You had Michael Mayer was consensus, which means he was first team on at least 3. Isaiah Foskey was consensus. Joe Alt was a first team on AP, and then also like ESPN and CBS. And then Michael Vincent was first team All America long snapper on AFCA. 2023, that was a team that went 9-4. 2023, a team that went 10-3. Got blown out by Louisville. Got beat on the road at Clemson. Lost to Ohio State. That team had 2 unanimous All-Americans, Joe Walt and Xavier Watts. Audric Estime was second team on AP and Sporting News. And then Howard Cross was second team on Football Writers, Walter Camp, AP, and Sporting News. So 4 of the 5 of the major services had 4 Notre Dame players had Howard Cross second team. The others 5 had unanimous Joe Walt and Xavier Watts, and then Estime was second team on 2 of those 5. Then you go to 2024 playoff team, and then we had 3 All-Americans. This is what doesn't make any sense. But that was also a team that lost to Northern Illinois. It wasn't a super dominant, statistical team. Xavier Watts was a consensus first team. Riley Mills was second team. Howard Cross was second team. And then you go to this past season, you had, again, 4 All-Americans, 2 unanimous All-Americans. Jadarian Price, first team on Sporting News, first team on Sports Illustrated, first team on Football Writers, second team on Walter Camp, and then Billy Schropp was second team on AFCA. You'd at least think they're going to be there, and yet they weren't. Notre Dame has had at least 2 consensus or unanimous All-Americans in all but one of Marcus Freeman's seasons. But in this year, where Notre Dame is getting more preseason love than they've ever had under Marcus Freeman's tenure, that we're not seeing that same love for Notre Dame players. And even weirder, there's a magazine that we'll talk about that has Notre Dame's position groups ranked really high, but not their players. And it's very bizarre. And I'm trying to figure out why. And here's basically where we're at. If you look at a lot of these magazines, you don't see a lot of Notre Dame players in the first and second team All-Americans. Even Phil Steele, who has Notre Dame as his number 1 power poll team. Phil Steele has 1 Notre Dame player on the first team All-America team and only 1 Notre Dame player on the second team All-America team. He's got 2 on his third team. That's it. So only 4 Notre Dame players on first, second, or third team, and only 2 on first or second team. That I found, and then one of the guys he has on his fourth team is Charles Jagasol, which I thought was odd. Not Anthony Knapp, not Gerby Lambert, Charles Jagasol. And that's a guy that nobody thinks higher of the Notre Dame team than him. He's got their running back room 20th. He's got their receiving core 34th. It's like, what? Okay, so you have their O-line is the number 1 O-line in the country, right? Didn't you have their O-line number 1?
Yeah, it was like their O-line was number 1, their D-line was 5th, their linebackers and secondary was first.
Their offensive line is number 1, but none of the offensive linemen are going to be first, second, or third team All-Americans. And the only guy you have on there on the fourth team is a dude that's not even going to play probably at the beginning of the year. You have the D-line is the number 5 D-line. Okay, only 1 All-American. Fine. Okay. Your linebacking room is number 1, but you only have 1 linebacker on the All-American list, and he's third team. And then, secondary, that one actually makes a little bit of sense. But I'm sorry, if you have the number 1 secondary in the country, the odds of you only having 2 guys that are first, second, third, or fourth team All-American is very slim. It was very bizarre. And that's the most favorable pro-Indy guy out there. And then it's the same story with Athlon, Trev. Athlon has Notre Dame number 4. They have them as a semifinal team. They have Notre Dame's O-line, D-line, linebacker room, and secondary ranked first or second nationally. Their receiver room is 9th. Their backfield is 4th. And yet you have 1 first-teamer, Leonard Moore, 1 second-teamer. I think theirs was Anthony Knapp, and then 1 third-teamer, Kingston Viliama Asa. How can you have the number one secondary in the country and only have one All-American on first, second, or third team? How can you have the number one offensive line in the country and all you have is a second-team All-American? And they go 3 All-American teams total. I don't get it. Lindy's has 2 All-Americans on first or second team. They have Leonard Moore first team and a Don Schuler third team. They don't even have Tay Johnson among the top 12 safeties in the country coming back this year. Anthony Knapp's the 4th best guard, but not a first or second team All-American. It is a very weird evaluation of the Notre Dame players individually. It's like, yes, you're giving Notre Dame the team respect. You're even giving them position group respect. But other than the lazy, let's all just make Leonard Moore a unanimous first team All-American since he was a unanimous last year, what are we talking about here? And I don't want to hear they think that Notre Dame will be the sum of their parts. Listen, if that were still true, you're still going to have more All-Americans than this. Do you understand what I'm saying? Even if you think it's, the sum is better than the parts. So basically what you're saying is that you think that Notre Dame is going to be Indiana. Is that fair? If you think it's all about the sum of the parts, right? Okay, cool. Well, that's what's true for Indiana last year. They had 2 consensus All-Americans, including the Heisman Trophy winner, and they had an All-American linebacker, 2 All-American DBs. They had 5. They had 5 first or second team All-Americans. So basically what you're saying is they think Notre Dame's going to be Indiana, but Indiana had 5. Well, Indiana won the title. Not before the All-American teams came out. They didn't. So you're telling me Indiana's going to have 5 All-Americans because the sum is greater than the parts, but Notre Dame's only going to have 2 or 3? That doesn't make any sense to me. It shows me that there's still this lack of respect for the Notre Dame players as a whole. They'll give love to the obvious ones. Jeremiah Love last year was obvious. Leonard Moore going into the season was obvious. The fact that Gerby Lambert was not mentioned on a single one of those teams, the fact that Anthony Knapp was only mentioned on one, but yet they all rank Notre Dame as having like the best offensive line in college football. What? I'm flabbergasted. I really am.
I think you gave the rationale right there. Notre Dame will always be fighting the stigma that they don't have top-level athletes. They just always will. Not that I agree with it, because obviously I don't, but that's where they're going to be until they go win a title. And I'm telling you guys right now, if Notre Dame wins a title, it's going to be what a gritty, fundamentally sound, hard-nosed team. Look what Marcus Freeman got out of these guys, and try to ignore the fact that outside of Leonard Moore, which, by the way, I don't give anybody credit for naming Leonard Moore first-team All-American. In the same light that I don't give anybody credit for naming Jeremiah Smith a first-team All-American. Like that doesn't take any sort of football knowledge in the slightest. It's like, yeah, obviously they're going to be one. No duh. Leonard Moore was a unanimous All-American last year, but Tay Johnson, who was on the FWAA freshman All-American team last year, doesn't make one of your 4 All-American teams.
Gerby Lambert, who's also a freshman All-American, doesn't make one of your 4 teams, but a guy who's injured and has played 3 college football games is going to be on there.
Yeah, I don't understand that. And I know, Brian, you're not this way either. I'm not mad that they didn't make Ashton Craig an All-American. I'm not upset that they didn't make Jason Onye an All-American.
I'm not even mad they didn't make Boubacar an All-American. I mean, it's a loaded year at defensive end. D-line is a position where it could be the sum is greater than the parts.
Sure.
But even there, Trev, Howard Cross and Riley Mills made back-to-back All-America teams, but yet nobody's going to make it this year. Their most talented defensive line, not one of them is going to be first or second, third team. Yeah. I mean, literally in Marcus Freeman's 4 years in Notre Dame, he's had an All-American defensive lineman in 3 of those 4 years. Or 2 of those 4 years. 3 of those 4. Yeah, 22, Isaiah Foskey. 23, Howard Cross. 24, Howard Cross and Riley Mills. It doesn't make any sense. It kind of does, but it doesn't. Like, it's... I look at it, Trevor, and part of it is frustrating because, again, what it shows me is a lot of the preseason love for Notre Dame from a ranking standpoint is more just about buying into the hype of Notre Dame and going along with the group think that Notre Dame's going to be really good, and they were really good late in the year, and blah 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 blah. If you think that's true, then you don't then rank Notre Dame in the top 4. And the Phil Steele one honestly gets me more than any of the others. You have Notre Dame as the number 1 team in the power poll and number 1 seed going to the playoffs, but you think they're only going to have 2 players that are first or second team All-Americans, and they're both going to be from the secondary? Not a single Notre Dame player is going to be first or second team All-American on offense.
Well, and here's the other one, especially about the offensive piece. The other one that doesn't make any sense to me is the discussion around CJ Carr, because these same outlets in the same breath will talk about how he is, one of their preseason Heisman favorites, like what he is on FanDuel, and talk about how he, is due for a big season and he's one of the top quarterbacks entering this year, and then not put him on an All-American team and talk about how he, I've seen some outlets project like where he'll go in the NFL draft. If you think that CJ Carr is going to win the Heisman Trophy, then how do you have him not being one of the first quarterbacks taken off the board?
Mm-hmm.
I don't understand that either.
Right.
Every Heisman winning trophy quarterback that I can remember was the first or second quarterback taken off the board. And the only one that was the second taken off the board was in the 24 NFL draft, because Caleb Williams, who also won the Heisman Trophy, went 1 spot before Jaden Daniels.
Right.
But
he was the Heisman Trophy winner the year before, right?
Right. Like, I don't understand. Like, yeah, CJ Carr is one of the top returning quarterbacks in the country, and he's a preseason favorite to win the Heisman, but he's not on an All-American team. And we think that Drew Mestamaker will be taken before him in the NFL draft. I just don't understand that rationale.
Well,
it makes no sense.
To your point, Athlon releases their tiers of Heisman Trophy winning Heisman Trophy contenders. Now, I thought, okay, CJ second, maybe it's alphabetical. That's why they have CJ second, because Arch A, CJ C, and you say, okay, but then number 3 is Trinidad Chambliss. Number 4 is Julian Sayin. Number 5 is Josh Hoover. Number 6 is Darian Menson. Number 7 is Dante Moore. Number 8 is Jeremiah Smith. So you have CJ Carr as the number 2 Heisman favorite, but you don't have him on your first, second, or third team All-America squad. It's bizarre. It's honestly, it is a bit frustrating. I think part of this is, I'll be honest with you, part of this is on Notre Dame, because they don't do a very good job of like hyping up and marketing their players like other people do. We don't get access to them. Like they put out a video yesterday of them handing kids like these golden bricks, these little tiny golden bricks. That's what you put out from first week of players being in workouts. That's all we get, and some still, So I think part of that's on Notre Dame, but the other part of it is it's not up for Notre Dame to make you watch football games and make you have rational arguments. And how are you going to have CJ Carr as the number 2 Heisman candidate in your tier 1, but yet he's not on your first, second, or third team All-American team? That makes no sense to me. Heisman watch, you have Lindy's has CJ Carr number 6. Okay, fine. If you have him number 6 and there's 5 quarterbacks, 4 quarterbacks ahead of him, okay, that's fine. Whatever. It is what it is. But like with Athlon, he's a tier 2 Heisman contender, but the number 2 in the tier 1 Heisman contender, but he's not going to be a first, second, or third team All-American. And just looking at other things, like nobody from the offense is going to have a breakout year on. I mean, look, as I mentioned, Notre Dame has had in Marcus Freeman's 4 years, they've had 3 either consensus or unanimous All-Americans on offense in 3 of the 4 years. The only exception was the 2014. But yet this year, we're not going to have anyone from the offense be a first or second team All-American, except for one outlet has Anthony Knapp second team. None of the other outlets have Anthony Knapp first, second, or third. And Archer said this: if you have him number 2 in the Heisman, then he needs to be at least first, second, or third team All-America list.
Yeah, 100%. CJ Carr would be the first Heisman Trophy winner in history to then also not be named an All-American. That
or
makes
the
no
first
sense.
Heisman Trophy runner-up to not be named an All-American.
Honestly,
like, it makes no sense. And look, like last year, Fernando Mendoza was a heck of a player last year. Trev, right? Great Heisman Trophy winner. Fernando Mendoza was not a unanimous All-American. He was a consensus All-American because Diego Pavia got it in another one. He got first team in another one. But then Diego was like second or third team with everybody. I mean, him saying, and they were the 3 Heisman guys, and they were kind of first, second, or third team with all the All-American teams. And yeah, CJ Carr is projected to win or be number 2 in the Heisman by people, and they don't have him as a third team All-American. It doesn't make any sense.
What isn't Phil Steele like the only one who named him an All-American, and it was on like his 4th team, which isn't even a thing?
Yeah,
like,
that's not a thing in real life. That's just a Phil Steele thing. Yeah, he had him 4th, but like the defense, Bubakar's 3rd team. Okay, that's Drake's 3rd team. Like you kind of understand that, but like he doesn't have anybody on offense on the 1st, 2nd, or 3rd team All-American team. Not a single guy, 1st, 2nd, or 3rd team All-American. That doesn't make any sense to me. The only time that's happened at Notre Dame recently was 24, and that's because some of their better players didn't play all year. It doesn't make any sense to me, Trev. It was very bizarre.
So in general, then, to kind of tie a bow on this segment, who do you think they're missing the boat on? Like, I mean, the easy answer is like everyone, but not named Leonard Moore. But
there's a couple. I mean, Athlon gave Anthony Knapp some love. They had him on 2nd team All-American. He overall is not getting enough preseason love. Pick one of him or Gerby. I mean, that's kind of how I look at it. Pick one of those 2 to be on your 2nd or 3rd team. None of the Notre Dame players, in my opinion, have played enough or played well enough to sit here and say they should be on the 1st team. That's fine. It's not even about 1st team All-American. I still don't see how you have Notre Dame as the number 1 team in the country, but only one of their players is going to be a 1st team All-American, Phil Steele. Like ESPN has Notre Dame being undefeated, the number 4 seed, and winning the national championship, but only one 1st team All-American. When has that ever happened? When? I just don't see it. But you have to have one of the offensive linemen on your 1st or 2nd team. I'm sorry, you just do. And I would argue maybe both. I mean, I'm like, for example, nobody has Texas winning at all, but yet I see like 6 Texas players being, 1st team All-Americans on Athlon. So it's like, well, hold on a second. You have like, think about this. Athlon, for example, has Oregon as the number 6 team in the country, and they have Oregon getting beat in the 2nd round by number 3 Texas. They have 9 Oregon players on their 1st, 2nd, or 3rd team All-American squad. 9. They have 6 Texas players on the 1st team, offense, defense, or special teams. 6. And yet Notre Dame is ranked higher than Oregon and only 1 spot below Texas. They have Notre Dame make it to the semifinals, which is exactly where Texas also gets beat. But Notre Dame only has 1 1st teamer, 1 2nd teamer, and 1 3rd teamer. You got to give the offensive line more love. If you're going to project the offensive line to be as good as these people are projecting it to be, you can't have them as the number 1 offensive line and then also say they're not going to be All-Americans. Now, Lindy's can say that because they have them as the 7th best offensive line. And one of the most ignorant things I've ever seen, they have the Notre Dame offensive line number 7 and USC number 5. You say what you want about Joe Rudolph, but you know what? I'm darn sure positive of saying this right now. He's put way better offensive lines on the field the last 3 years than USC has.
Without a doubt. Without a doubt. And it hasn't been close.
And yet USC somehow is going to be the number 5 offensive line in the country. They have everybody coming back. Yeah, so does Notre Dame. I mean, their most experienced player they lost is we're all like, that's an upgrade. And so the other one is linebacker. That's where I don't think they're getting enough 1st or 2nd team love. Is at linebacker. I not having Drake or Kingston or Jaden Osbury first. I've seen now 2 magazines have Notre Dame's linebackers number 1. I think that Lindy's even has the Notre Dame linebacking core ranked relatively well. Let me go look up where they have the linebackers. They have them as, it's not as high as others, but it's still high. They have Notre Dame's linebackers 6th. Oh, by the way, I do think they also had USC's linebackers ahead of Notre Dame. That's where I'm like, dude, I just think some of these people are just pulling stuff out of there.
Who had Notre Dame's linebackers behind USC?
I believe Lindy's did.
Oh,
Lindy's had no, I'm sorry. They had yes, they did. Lindy's had USC's offensive line, defensive line, and linebackers all ranked ahead of Notre Dame's. Yep. Yep. And their backfield was only 2 spots below Notre Dame. Neither receiving core is ranked in the top 10, by the way. I thought that was fascinating. Very fascinating. And then the other one is the secondary. Leonard Moore's a great player. Great player. Best DB in college football. Yet, that's the only guy that has any consistent All-American level. Like, he's one of 5. We've seen great DBs be part of not very good secondaries. Like, that's what, like, first, second, or third team, you have Tay as second team on, no. Adon is second team on Lindy's. Tay is not first or second on anybody. I believe Phil Steele has Tay on his third team. No, he has him on his second team. Yes, so Phil Steele has him on second team. Adon has him on the second team, but Tay's not on anybody else's, and Adon is not on anybody else's. So I think the secondary is also getting way overlooked. So I just think their defense as a whole, you guys are all going to tell us, how great the defense is, but then you only have one consistent All-American on that defense. You guys must think Chris Ash is like the greatest defensive coordinator in the history of the planet.
Above anything else, I just want there to be some level of consistency. There is a world, and I'm not trying to defend anybody that put out these bad All-American rankings, but there's a world that you could try to spin that Notre Dame makes a run in the playoffs and does all of this stuff without a bunch of All-Americans. I'm not going to buy into that, but there's a world that you can do that. There's no world that you can spin to me that they have the number 1 secondary in the country with 1 All-American. There's not a world that you can spin to me that Notre Dame has the number 1 linebacking unit in the country, and one of them that in Kingston Viliama-Asa that you predicted to be the number 2 linebacker in the 2027 draft class, but then not make him an All-American. There's nowhere that you can spin that. So you have to pick one or the other. If you're going to have 2 DBs from Oregon as All-Americans and 1 from Notre Dame, then you can't then put Notre Dame as the number 1 secondary in the country. That makes no sense. That absolutely makes no sense. It was the lack of player recognition for me that really, really put a downgrade on a lot of these magazines.
Yeah. Again, I think a small part of this is I think this should be this should be a wake-up call for Notre Dame's communication team and SID and those people that you need to do a much better job of promoting your best players, which they don't do. And you need to be doing more to promote Tay Johnson and Don Schuler and Drake Bowen. Not as, let's get to know these players. That's great. That's great on social media. Like some of the stuff that I was told last year, this isn't me because we didn't get any of this stuff, but I'm talking to people that are in the national media that have votes on All-American teams. And they're like, yeah, Notre Dame was one of the last teams to get stuff out on their players last year. So, that's part of it as well. Let's be honest. That's part of it as well. They've got to do more in this era, especially in this era of NIL. And I understand your whole thing is, team glory. The players don't have to be involved in this. This is what your SID group should be doing behind the scenes of emailing stuff and sending stuff out to voters and the Jim Thorpes and these type of awards. It doesn't have to be outward promotion of Marcus Freeman talking about how great his players. He does that. He talks about how good his players are. He talks about when asked about Tay, how good Tay is or Adon is or Drake is or those type of guys. That's kind of what their jobs should be. First and foremost is promoting their program and promoting their players. But at the same time, these people need to use some common sense and be like, hold on a second. How can we have this be true? But then this team is not going to have All-Americans. Indiana had 5 first or second team All-Americans last year, but Notre Dame is only going to have 2. And according to some outlets, 1. It doesn't make any sense to me. It's just like, could you have that to your point of? Yeah, but who has done that? Has there been a national champion that's only had like 2 first or second team All-Americans? Notre Dame has even only had one. Notre Dame hasn't even had that happen to them in the last 4 years. So this is going to be the best Notre Dame team of Marcus Freeman's tenure, but the worst in regards to producing All-Americans. Trev, In 3 of Marcus Freeman's 4 years, in 3 of his 4 years so far, he's had at least 2 unanimous or consensus. He's had 2 years, 23 and 25. They had 2 unanimous All-Americans. 2. And then in another year, a year in which they lost to Marshall, and Stanford, they had 2 consensus All-Americans. Yet this team is only going to have 1. It makes you're just not even being rational at this point in time. That's my beef. Is you're not even making any sense at this point in time. It's
wild.
Yep. It's frustrating. It's frustrating partly on Notre Dame, but it's even more frustrating on the side of just this constant. You're still doubting Notre Dame, huh? But you're still doubting the quality of their players. Even after watching the 2 years in a row we saw from Xavier Watts, from watching, for 2 years, Notre Dame has arguably the best offensive lineman in the country. For 2 years, they have arguably the best running back in the country. For what they've had 3 straight years of an All-American, unanimous or consensus All-American in the secondary. And how many freshman All-Americans? And yet we're going to say this is going to be Marcus Freeman's least productive All-American team. It makes zero. A consensus top 5 team's going to have 1 first-team All-American. When does that happen? When has that happened? And I'm not talking 1 unanimous. That's possible. They could have 0 unanimous All-Americans this year. But, I mean, Indiana did not have a unanimous All-American last year. And they had the Heisman Trophy winner.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, now I think you and I would agree that if Fernando Mendoza did what he did and had a 12-0 season and he played in the SEC, he would have been a unanimous All-American. Like, let's be honest about that. Diego Pavia. If you flip Fernando and Diego Pavia, one plays in the Big Ten, one plays in the SEC, the Diego Pavia is not getting anyone naming him first-team All-American. Let's be real about that. That's the SEC bias. But even Indiana last year had 2 consensus All-Americans and had 5 different players earn first-team All-America. 4 different players earned first-team All-America. First-team All-America honors by at least one of the major 5 outlets. So that's the AFCA, that's American Football Coaches Association, the Football Writers, Walter Camp, the AP, and Sporting News. That's the 5 that determine it. Carter, so you had Fernando Mendoza was first team on 4. Carter Smith was first team on 3. Aiden Fisher was the first team on 2 of them, and D'Angelo Pons was the first team on 1 of them. Plus, you had Lewis Moore was first team on CBS Sports Illustrated and USA Today. 5 different guys, and yet Notre Dame has 1. On all those magazines, 4 or 5 magazines, Notre Dame only has 1 guy that's made first team All-American. 1.
It was the easiest one to name.
It's irrational. It's irrational. So I am annoyed by it, Trev. I'm not gonna lie. I'm very annoyed by it. So we were going to talk about this weekend. We're like, this is going to be a topic for next week.
Oh yeah,
because I am very frustrated by it. The Notre Dame players deserve more respect than this, in my opinion. And you know what though? Here's what I hope. I hope that the dads of the Notre Dame players or people on campus of Notre Dame, let them know about all of this. Let them know about all of it. Hey, by the way, Adon, these preseason magazines don't think much of you outside of maybe one. They don't think you're that. Hey, Christian. Hey, Tay. Hey, Knapp. Hey, Gerby. Look, just great. Give this team more fuel. Please continue disrespecting this football team. So from an analyst standpoint, I think this is bullpucky. From a Notre Dame fan standpoint, good. Keep overlooking them. Keep disrespecting them. Give a team that's already ticked off more reason to be ticked off. Please. Thank you. Thank you for that. And then we can all look back and point to how dumb these All-American rankings, preseason rankings were. Well, it's just preseason. I understand that, guys. It's just preseason. But preseason recognition does matter. It does. It absolutely matters because you have to have an absolute monster season like Xavier Watts had in 2023 to go from someone who isn't getting much love to all of a sudden you're an All-American. you have to have a monster season, and it's an unfair standard, and whereas if you're getting the proper respect, then it's a little easier to kind of make that jump and make that transition. I don't think Sporting News did a preseason All-American team. That's the one caveat to this, because I'd be very curious where they would rank some of these Notre Dame players if they did an All-American team. They had a Heisman watch, and C.J. Carr was number 1 on their list. But I'm going through it, Trev. I don't think they did an All-American team. Because after their Heisman list, they just jump into Notre Dame and then the conference previews, and then the thing ends with FCS talk and, MAC talk. So I don't think they did a preseason All-American team. I'd be willing to bet that they might be the one exception to this, because I know they're higher on Drake Bowen than others and some of their offensive linemen. So I think that might be an exception, but they didn't do a preseason All-American team.
Brian, to take us home today here in the Irish Breakdown podcast, brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel, we have a daily mailbag to take us the rest of the way. Now, this does happen to be your first mailbag. You put MB for mailbag or a mailbox emoji. It lets us know to set your question aside. Super chats get bumped to the top. Questions today, folks, are geared towards the topics that we discussed today. So Notre Dame players getting overlooked, the preseason magazines, because I'm sure a lot of you have those ordered. And then also the first topic that we discussed today was the 2023 recruiting class and how it proved a lot of people wrong. They were a very underrated group coming into college, and they're starting to surpass what their high school rankings were. That's for sure.
Let's kick things off with Archer. Our resident Ohio State fan has a question that I think is a good one.
IU was ranked number 20 in the preseason AP to start last year. If a team ranked outside of the top 15 in the preseason poll were to win it all this year, who do you think it would be?
So as we look through these rankings, and I see, first of all, we felt Indiana was woefully underranked. I think you and I both had them at the bottom of the top 10.
Yeah.
So for us in our preseason rankings, they weren't the number 20 team in the country. So then what I think would help me is like, okay, what team that's ranked outside the top 10 for us do you see being that kind of team? And honestly, I have a tough time with this. I mean, if I look at Sporting News, that would mean one of Utah, Penn State, Louisville, Iowa, Texas Tech, Houston, Illinois, SMU, Washington, or Virginia Tech, or someone unranked. I don't know who that would be. Like, I don't see a team like Indiana. What playoff team from last year finds themselves ranked outside the top 15? I don't see that. You look at Sporting News top 25, and that would be, let's go here to the top 25. That would be Michigan, no, Houston, Louisville, Washington, SMU, Iowa, Utah, Penn State, Clemson, maybe just because Dabo's won titles, but I don't think that's a roster that can make a run. Florida, Virginia Tech, Tennessee, Arizona, Boise State, Oklahoma State, Illinois, Missouri. I don't see any of those teams making a run. Even if a team like Arizona State that you and I think could be a bit of a surprise team in college football this year, I don't see them being a team that's going to make a run and win 3 or 4 games. Preseason top 25 for Athlon, it would mean BYU, Washington, Penn State, Houston, Utah, SMU, Louisville, Boise State, or Iowa. Tennessee also. Florida, Clemson, like I don't see it. I don't know who that would be, honestly, Archer. I really don't.
The only team that comes to mind that I could see the AP ranking outside of the top 15, and it would be close, would be Alabama. ESPN has them ranked at 15th. I've seen other way too early preseason, post-spring things that have Alabama at like 16th.
Maybe if LSU's outside the top 15, maybe.
Yeah, but the Alabama is the only team that comes to mind for me because I think they would have the quarterback to do it, especially if Keelan Russell wins the job. I love their perimeter skilled talent on both offense and defense. Just the question's going to come down to coaching. Will Kalen DeBoer be able to establish a run game on offense, and can Kane Womack put together a disciplined defense? Those are 2 very huge questions for the Crimson Tide, but they're the only team that I've seen ranked around 15, 16 that have the talent to do it compared to Penn State, Michigan, Houston, Louisville.
Because I haven't seen Oklahoma outside the top 15. They're a sleeper team for me from outside the top 10 that could maybe make a run, but outside the top 15, that'd be tough. And And again, I think the Indiana example wasn't so much that they shouldn't have been in the 20s at 20.
Agreed.
They should have been higher. There's no team that's getting that type of being overlooked this year. A team that made the playoffs last year that somehow nobody's giving respect to, other than what, Tulane and JMU. Right? I mean, look, last year's playoff teams, Indiana's in the top 15. They were number 1 seed. Number 2, Ohio State's in the top 15. Number 3, Georgia's in the top 15. Number 4, Texas Tech's in the top 15. Number 5, Oregon's in the top 15. Number 6, Ole Miss is in the top 15. Not ours. Now, that might be a team, Trev, that if you and I are wrong about Ole Miss, that's outside our top 15, that could maybe surprise us. Because you and I are down on Ole Miss, but let's say we're wrong and they're every bit as good as they were last year.
Sure.
That would be one. But they're not going to be in the AP, outside the AP top 15. And then A&M's in the top 15. Oklahoma's in the top 15. You mentioned Alabama, maybe outside the top 15 in the AP. Maybe. I doubt it, but maybe. Because I get what you're saying. Like some others have had them around there. I think the AP probably overrate them a little bit. But if the AP has them where some of these other polls have them, then maybe they're outside the top 15. Number 10, Miami's not in the top 15. So you got to get down to the 11 seed to have anybody that's for sure going to be outside the top 15 that was in the playoffs last year. But I'll say this. In our ranking, Ole Miss is probably the best bet.
Yeah.
Because if we're making a prediction on them that's different from everybody else, if we're wrong, that would be a good one to go with.
Notre Dame Wine and Cheese. Notre Dame's schedule is ranked 42nd right now. By the end of the regular season, will it be above 42nd, and by how much? Will Miami, BYU, SMU, and Navy end the year ranked, even with a Notre Dame loss?
Yeah, I mean, all of them could finish in the top 25 if they lose to Notre Dame. The question isn't about whether or not they lose to Notre Dame. The question is whether or not they lose to anybody else. I think Miami and BYU and SMU all are ranked if they have 2 losses at the end of the year. Now, ranked where will be a debate. SMU probably won't be ranked as high as Miami or BYU if they both have 2 losses, but they could still be ranked if one of them's Notre Dame. I think all 3 of those Power 4 teams that you mentioned, ND Wine and Cheese, would still be ranked if they have 2 losses, including one to Notre Dame. Navy's probably not ranked with 2 losses. Unless it's one of those years where the G5 has nobody in the top 25 and they're the best G5 team and they have to bump them in to get them there. That could be the only exception to that. But look, will it be ranked above 42? We don't know. It's dependent upon 2 things, which we talked about in our schedule breakdown last week, Trev. Number 1, your top 3-4 teams have to be as good as advertised. That means they've got to be in that 7 to 22-ish range at the end of the year. You've got to have 3 top 25 wins. That would be more than what Notre Dame would have had in 2024 at the end of the regular season. Because the only teams that they had ranked at the end of the 24 season, I believe, were just Army and Navy. That's it. I don't think Louisville was still ranked at the end of the year in 24. I have to go look at that, but I don't think that they were. I'll pull that up as we're talking here, Trev. But at the very least, you match what Notre Dame had in 2024, and Notre Dame not only made the playoff at 11-1, they made it with a loss to a MAC team and fewer top 25 wins than what this team had. Yeah, Louisville dropped out of the top 25 after the November 16th season game where they lost to Stanford. So they were not ranked. So Notre Dame had 2 wins over teams that finished the year in the top 25. So that's part of it. That's step 1. And step 2 is you need a Michigan State to be better than people think. You need Wisconsin to be better than people think. You need a bit of a growth year for North Carolina. You need Syracuse to, you don't have to be as bad as good as you were in 24 where you won 10 games, but you can't be as bad as last year. Get somewhere in the middle. You're a bowl team. Like, you're going to need some of those teams to be better than people think as well. Because if your top 3 teams are everybody as good as advertised and your bottom 8 Power 4 teams plus Rice are as bad as they were last year, Notre Dame will not have the number 42 schedule in the country. It'll probably be worse than that. So it's you do need both of those things to be true. You need those at least 2 of your top 3 you need at least 3 of your top 4 to remain good, and you need a lot of those bottom feeders to become middle of the pack teams, bowl type teams. That's what's going to drag your overall strength of schedule above 42. At the end of the day, ND Wine and Cheese, if Notre Dame handles their business, it doesn't matter where anybody else is ranked. Indiana went 11-1 in 2024 and did not play a single ranked team that they beat. And they would have hosted in the current format. They only traveled as the 10 seed because they got leaped by BYU or by Boise State and Arizona State because of the rule then of the top 4 highest ranked conference title winners get buys. There's no way Notre Dame's schedule is going to be worse than what Indiana's was in 2024. And they had a loss. So 11-1 Notre Dame gets in no matter what. It's just about where the seeding is. And then a 12-0 Notre Dame team is playing at home or getting a bye. Most likely getting a bye.
Yeah, I'm not too worried about where their schedule ranks. I saw that it was ranked 42nd right now. The other factor of this too is, what do other teams' schedules do? Like even if there's a world where like everybody pans out the way that we think, Miami, BYU, SMU hold strong, Navy hold strong in the G5, and you have some surprise teams. Like for Notre Dame to make a drastic jump, there will also have to be some other teams that fall. Their strength of schedule also falls. Now, I think of it kind of like you brought up Indiana in 2024. Preseason, that schedule looked pretty nasty.
Yeah.
You play Ohio State on the road. You play Michigan at home, Washington at home, the 2 teams that the year prior played for the national title. You know, you had Nebraska at home and what Matt Rule was going into year 2 with them. And so
a lot of hype on it. They were ranked when they played, I believe.
Yeah, they were. And you go and you look at that schedule and what it ended up being. Their strength of schedule most likely dropped from where it was initially projected at the start of the season. So I say all of that to say some of Notre Dame's ranking will also depend on what the other schedules around the country do as well. I mean, as of right now, Ole Miss has just a nasty schedule. But what if some of those teams don't pan out the way that they're looking right now? That's another factor as well. But
I think Georgia was kind of that way last year. Like we thought Georgia was going to have another just brutal schedule. And it was still a challenging schedule, but like at Tennessee ended up not being as tough of a game. At Auburn was not as tough of a game. Florida neutral field. There's a lot of Florida preseason top 25 hype last year. They ended up not being as good. Some people had Texas as the preseason #1 team. They ended up outside the top 10. You know, Georgia Tech ended up not being quite as good as people thought they might be. So like that's a great point, Trev. Sometimes those schedules we think are tough end up not being as tough as maybe you thought. Now, Georgia 24 schedule was bonkers. It's like we talk about how tough Ohio State's schedule is, and I think it will be, but like maybe it isn't. Maybe a couple of those teams aren't as good or whatever. But the reality is Ohio State could have half of the top teams that they play not be as good as advertised, and they still have 3 really good opponents on the schedule. Whereas if Notre Dame's top 2 or 3 teams aren't as good as advertised, they have no good wins. And now you need to run the table and run it impressively to get a bye. But if you run the table, even if all those teams stink, you're still hosting a playoff game. At worst case scenario, you're hosting a playoff game. So at the end of the day, the season is up to Notre Dame. It's the leave no doubt aspect of it. You don't leave it up to anybody else. And Andrew Gilmore says, can Wisconsin bolster Notre Dame's strength of schedule? They drew one of the most favorable Big Ten schedules. I mean, we talked about that last week, Andrew. I think that they're one that can. I think Wisconsin and Michigan State, you know, maybe a North Carolina, maybe a Stanford, maybe a Syracuse are the teams that we kind of have our eye on potentially being surprises that help bolster Notre Dame's schedule. But at the end of the day, we better hope that Notre Dame is not sitting here praying that
banking on Wisconsin
by Wisconsin being a really good team. Handle your business, and it doesn't matter.
Agreed.
Handle your business, and you don't have to start scoreboard watching until you lose. As long as you keep winning, it doesn't matter what anybody else does.
Yep.
Like not even a little bit.
From Time Cone, folks, do you think Notre Dame's offense is 60-40 pass run this year?
I will say this again, and I mean no disrespect by this. I have never, will never evaluate a team by the run pass snap splits on plays. I don't care. Like last year, Notre Dame had the Doak Walker Award winner, and they had more passing yards than rushing yards. They weren't a 50-50 team. Pass plays get more yards per attempt than rush plays, usually. If they don't, you either have the world's greatest rush offense or you have the world's worst pass offense. You know, it's just I don't care. I care more about just overall effectiveness. I mean, last year with the Doak Walker Award winner, Notre Dame was 55.6 of their production, and Doak Walker Award winner, and a lot of blowouts where you weren't throwing the ball in the second half, and they still 55.6% of their yards were through the air. So I don't really care about that. Maybe. I would think the more effective they are, the less that they're going to throw the football. You have to look at the fact that last year Notre Dame also was a team that was very efficient throwing the football. And when you're efficient throwing the football, your run game stats are going to be a lot higher from a attempt standpoint. For example, Trev, when you look at like some of CJ Carr's production last year and some of the games he was really good, he didn't throw the ball a whole lot. And you look at the Purdue game, he was brilliant that game. Threw for 223 yards, 2 touchdowns, and didn't throw in the fourth quarter. Well, attempted 12 passes in that game. He went 10 of 12 for 223 yards and 2 touchdowns. Threw for 354 yards against Arkansas, only attempted 30 passes in that game. Some of his best passing games last year, actually his highest yards total last year was 354. His other game, next best game was 342. His next best game was 299. And in those 3 games, Trev, he averaged 11.8, 11.0, and 13.6 or 12.0 yards per attempt. And then against A&M, he averaged 9.2 yards per attempt, so 293 yards on 32 attempts. And then, Navy's another one. He had 218 yards and 3 touchdowns. He only attempted 16 passes because they were hitting big plays. So I don't really care a whole lot about pass versus run splits. I care about, are you explosive and efficient in both areas? That's honestly all I care about. If you're there, then God bless you. That's wonderful. I'm just not. I just don't really care. I mean, Indiana last year was a 60-40 run pass team. They had the Heisman Trophy winning quarterback, Trevor. They had 406 pass attempts last year out of 1,055 plays. They were 38.5% pass attempts. Well, do we really think that Fernando Mendoza only threw the ball 40% of the time when he was in the game? Or maybe it's a situation where he was over that, but when they put the backups in, no, they didn't put the backups in as much as Notre Dame. But the point is, when you have big leads, you're going to not throw the ball as much. So
to your point,
that factors in.
To your point, it's about how effective you are when you do it. I mean, Navy's pass split is 95-5, maybe. But one of the things that made them so dangerous with Blake Horvath is what he could do with his arm. As long as you're effective when you do it, I'm with you. I don't care about splits either.
Yep. All right, got a question from Salty Virginia Peanuts. Honestly, from this one, Salty, which preseason magazines routinely fail to rank Notre Dame's classes accurately, especially in the 2023 class? Well, I don't know that preseason magazines do recruiting rankings. They usually take someone else's. If you're going to ask me what recruiting service ranks Notre Dame the lowest, it's 247 almost across the board. I mean, last year, Athlon had Notre Dame's class, On3 had Notre Dame's class ranked number 1. Now, their industry ranking had Notre Dame 2, but their own ranking had Notre Dame 1. I think ESPN had them, 4th?
Yeah.
And I think Rivals had them 1st or 2nd before Rivals got bought out. And I think ESPN had them ranked in the top 4 as well. Let me see here. Recruiting class rankings, ESPN, because they don't do a good job of keeping track, because theirs are articles. They had Notre Dame number 4, and then 247 had them 6. Last year's recruiting class 6th. So I'm pretty sure. And again, not the composite ranking. People have to be able to know the difference between their personal rankings and what their consensus rankings were. Their ranking of Notre Dame was 6th last year. The industry ranking, I believe, I think they had them higher than that. I have to go look. I don't even know how to get the composite rankings or whatever anymore, Trev. But because I'll give them some credit for this one. 247 now provides their own rankings first. So like, I hate when On Three is like 4-star such and such, and I'm like, you have them as a 3-star. Why you keep calling them as a 4-star? Well, it's the industry ranking. Well, so what? You're promoting somebody else's rankings? Promote your own. And I was happy to see 247 do that. And then of course Shannon Terry's goofy, you know what, is like, oh, you know, he wants to criticize it or what. I'm like, dude, just get over yourself. Like, seriously, let them do them. You built them, you sold them, mind your business and go, you know, focus on this new clickbait venture that you're focused on and not worry about the old clickbait venture that you created. You know, just focus on this clickbait venture. But I'll give them credit for that, but they're notorious for that. So let's get down to some more here. Trev, a lot from Salty. So we'll get to him here in a little bit. And then here's one from Andrew.
What are the magazines slotting Indiana? Where are the magazines slotting Indiana? Excuse me.
Sporting News had them number 1. ESPN has Indiana number 6. Lindy's has Notre Dame or has Indiana. Give me a second here. They have them number 5. And then Athlon has Indiana. I think their top 25 was early on as well. They have Indiana as the number. It's on the previous page. They have Indiana number 5 as well. So 1, 5, 5, 6, and then let's see where old Phil Steele has the Hoosiers. He has them as the number 6 team in his power poll, and then as the number, let's see here, 5 team on his more of what would be in line of the top 25 teams. So 1 through 6 is where they are. And I think it's 1, 5, 6 is where different people have them. So that's where they are.
From Battle in the Trenches, is the lack of All-American listing for Notre Dame a result of bias and in keeping with the idea, quote, we don't want to be wrong about Notre Dame, but don't think they're actually that good?
I think that's a big part of it, Trevor. Don't you? Like that they are ranking Notre Dame high because that's what everybody's doing, and they don't want to be wrong. They don't want to be like, yeah, we had them 9th, 10th or 11th or whatever, or this allows us to say, well, we had them 4th because, their schedule was soft, but, we had them losing, the second round of the playoff, something like that. It gives you cover to kind of say, well, we weren't that high on them at the end of the year. See, they made it as the 4 seed. We got their ranking right, but they got beat, by the number 5 team, or they went to the semifinals and got blasted by so-and-so. And see, their players weren't that good. They just played a soft schedule, and then they can play into it that way. I think that's part of it. Yeah, I think there's a difference between, and there's just a lot of people that just don't know Notre Dame's roster. Like whoever was responsible for putting the depth chart together for Sporting News, and it wasn't Bill, has no idea of anything about Notre Dame football. I don't even know where he could have even gotten the list he came up with. No clue. So I think there's a lot of factors go into it. But, yeah, I think there's a lot of groupthink in the media, in sports and politics. And, people on this side tend to all think this way, and people on this side all think that way. In sports, it's more so it's just more one. There's no right versus left sports media, and there's just the national sports media. And they all, there's individuals who like to buck the trends and put their own thoughts out. But as entities, there's a lot of groupthink. Well, we don't want to be wrong. If we're all wrong, then, we're all wrong. It doesn't make us look bad. But if we have Notre Dame 10th or 11th and they go win the title, then we look stupid. And now we got to deal with the Notre Dame bias thing. Whereas if Notre Dame underachieves, they can say, well, we just looked at their schedule. It was so soft. We didn't actually think they were that good. Look, we only had one guy as an All-American, and, we didn't think they were that good. I think there's a lot of that goes into it, Trev.
Yeah, I think it's a mix between that and just blind ignorance of not willing to accept the fact that Notre Dame has top-level athletes on their team. There are many outlets and many major entities that still believe that Notre Dame will get like the once-in-a-while great athlete. That's how they view Jeremiah Love. That's how they view Leonard Moore right now. That's we've seen that before in the past. And then everybody else is just trying to play catch up, and they're a great compliment to what star Leonard Moore is, or a great compliment to what Jeremiah Love is. And they're not willing to give those players their due recognition. I think it's that, and it's the fact that they don't want to be wrong. They're not willing to admit that Notre Dame has top-level athletes. Whereas I guarantee you, if a lot of Notre Dame players entered the portal, they'd be top 100 portal players, guaranteed. And that's just what it's the stigma of the logo on their jerseys and the color of their gold helmets. But if Adon Schuler was at Georgia, he would be an All-American by most.
Has tried to get him to transfer to Georgia like in each of the last 2 off seasons, by the way.
Yes, 100%. If Gerby Lambert was at Texas, he'd be on an All-American list. If C.J. Carr was the quarterback at Ohio State and not at Notre Dame, he would still be a Heisman favorite. He would still be this in the NFL draft. But then he would also be on most All-American teams. Like that's the nature of the beast.
Yep. Absolutely correct. All right, let's get to some more here, Trev. We got one from Salty Virginia Peanuts. This is a very interesting one.
Which recruits that ultimately did not commit to Notre Dame in 2023 would you most like to have seen commit?
Keon Keeley. That's an easy one. I mean, at the time, I liked Peyton Bowen a lot as a player, but as you guys remember, I had some major red flags about that kid's maturity based on how everything went down. But even then, even if Peyton was as good as we thought he was going to be, Keon was still that dude. I would have loved to have seen Keon in a real strength and conditioning program and get real coaching for the last 3 years. He had that as a freshman, but he also needed a smaller environment with more people kind of looking over his shoulder and making sure they were steering him on the right path. And I think he needed Notre Dame way, way more than Peyton Bowen needed Notre Dame. And I think we're having a different conversation about the defensive line this year if Keon's part of it. I think, I think we're feeling they might have the number 1 defensive line in the country because you're looking at Boubacar, Bryce, and Keon as a pretty special trio.
There's also a world where we don't talk about Keon Keeley on the 2026 Notre Dame defensive line if he committed originally to Notre Dame in 23, because he could have gone to the league after 25. Who knows?
Potentially. I think Keon would have probably needed a little bit more seasoning off the field and on the field. But, Trev, you're not out of the realm of possibility at all. I mean, he was a top 10 national player. You're not at all off base in saying that.
Yeah, I mean, think about and this is with all due respect to all of the players that played on their 24 D line, but imagine a world where Boubacar gets hurt and Jordan Botelho gets hurt, then you insert Keon Keeley into the starting lineup. What
as
would
a sophomore,
like?
Right, as a sophomore. What would he have learned playing behind Javonte Jean-Baptiste in 2023? A sixth-year senior that had kind of been through it. Yeah, 100%. 100%. We don't know. We could be like, hey, big shoes for Bryce to fill, with that first-round draft pick. Yeah, I mean, it's possible. It's absolutely possible.
Another one from Salty. Which was the first game in which you remember a 2023 player breaking out?
Navy 2023 with Jaden Greathouse catching 2 touchdown passes in the first game of his career.
Yeah.
That would be there was nobody in the 23 class made a more immediate impact than Jaden Greathouse.
100%.
I mean, he also had a huge touchdown catch late in the first half against NC State. He was getting targeted a lot early, and they moved him to the boundary. He hurt his hammy, and he didn't do a whole lot the rest of the year. But it's fun conversation when you start thinking about the 23 class. Like, when do you remember Jeremiah Love breaking out? It was the Ohio State game in 2023. Like, that's the first time. I mean, he had the long touchdown run against Tennessee State, but that was kind of like him toying with a not very good FCS team. You know what I mean? Like that. Come on, man. It's like it's Tennessee State, but that Ohio State game, I was like, okay, this kid's going to be a dude. You look at Jordan Faison. It was the Louisville game in 2023. That was the game where we were like, okay, he went out there. I think his first catch, was a touchdown. First career catch was a touchdown, like a 40-something yard touchdown against Louisville. That was his breakout. Charles Jagasol, freshman year, Oregon State. Sullivan Absher's breakout, I would argue, came against USC. No, not USC. Pitt last year. I thought that was the best game he had all year. Sam Pendleton's breakout, first game of 2024 against Texas A&M. He had a heck of a game that game. Joe Otting, I thought, was really good against USC in his first career start this past year. Boubacar, first breakout play was as a freshman against USC. He sacked Caleb Williams. But first breakout game would be Purdue 2024. He had the pick six, had some really good pressures. Drake Bowen, his breakout. I'd say probably Louisville 2024 was when, because I thought Drake was a little tentative in the first couple games in 24.
I'd agree with that.
I thought he was good against Purdue, but like they were so bad. I think Louisville's the first game where I was like, okay, Drake has kind of figured it out. He's figured it out a little bit. Yeah. Like that would be the game that I thought he that was his breakout game for me. Jaden Ausberry, that's an interesting one. First breakout for Jaden Ausberry. I mean, the first big play he made was against Louisville. He was the one that recovered the fumble on the Tyler Shuck run where Leonard Moore came up behind and knocked it out. Jaden was hustling, and he was in position to recover the ball. First game where I was like, okay, he's on his way. It's probably Georgia Tech in 24. He was way more productive in the second half of the year in 24. He only had one tackle for loss. He didn't have a single tackle for loss until that game. And he had one then, 1.5 against Florida State, 1.5 against Army, a half one against USC, 2 against Indiana. But that Georgia Tech game, he made a couple plays in space where you're like, okay, Jaden has figured it out. He's starting to make an impact.
Mine for Jaden Ausberry was actually the worst game of that season. Was Northern Illinois. He was one of the only defenders not named Xavier Watts that actually looked like he wanted to play football.
That's a good point. That's
like
a good point.
That was a game where after watching it, because after I was able to lick my wounds for a couple days and put that loss behind me, I was like, there was one guy that looked like he wanted to be out there, not named Xavier Watts, and it was Jaden Ausberry. He was a change of pace guy on defense. He came in and made some big time stops.
He did. His best game was probably Army.
Yeah,
it was probably his best game. Yeah, that's a good call on the Northern Illinois game, Trev. I've kind of blocked that game a little bit.
Understandably so. That's when you brought up Jordan Faison, I completely forgot Louisville because I was like, oh, dude, Oregon State, he was dynamite, unstoppable. I was like, oh, I guess he did have a good game against Louisville.
Yeah, like 3 catches.
He was the only one.
Right. Like, because it's a bad game. Christian Gray, his breakout actually came his freshman year when he had to step into the starting lineup when Cameron Hart got hurt. Because remember, Benjamin Morse in that game was not playing. Then Cam got hurt in like the first or second quarter, and then Christian came off the bench and played great and had that one-handed interception in that game. So that was his freshman year. And then Adon Schuler's breakout game was his first start. It was against Texas A&M.
Heck yeah.
24. So like Jordan Faison or Greathouse was the first of all of them, but that was the breakout for all of them. I thought that'd be a fun way to kind of go through it. Yeah. Here's another one from Salty that we'll get to here real quick.
After Jeremiah Love, which member of the 23 class will be most fondly remembered by Irish fans?
That is to be determined. I would imagine as of right now, based on what we know right now, probably a Don or Jordan Faison as of right now. The reason I don't think it's Drake Bowen is because for some reason, there's a very small but vocal group of Notre Dame fans that just do nothing but bang on Drake Bowen and never give him credit for how well he plays. He's led the team in tackles the last 2 years, but you'd think he sucked, according to some of these people. Oh, he's not athletic. It's just some really bad takes. And, but I think Jordan Faison is very beloved by Notre Dame fans because he's a great story. Luke Talich, we talked about him earlier. He may end up being that, but I think Jordan is there now. Don is there now. He's, I think, a beloved member of fond memories of him. I think that's where I'd be right now. When it's all said and done, after Jaden or after Jeremiah, I think this year is going to have a lot to do with how we view Boubacar, how we view Drake Bowen, how we view Christian Gray. So I think a lot of how you are remembered by the fans is how you finish your career, not by how you started. There weren't a lot of people that loved Tony Rice as a player in 1987. That we look back on him now and like, oh, he's my favorite player ever. And there were people that wanted him benched and all this other stuff in 1987 when he was coming off the bench, or didn't think he should play or whatever. And I don't remember that personally. You hear that, you've heard those stories. So that's what I'm saying. It's just going to depend on how the season turns out. But I'd probably say Faison and Adon Schuler as of today would be that next group of guys.
Yeah, they're in there for sure. I'll share it because this is a fun question. But yeah, I'd say Drake is in there. Potentially Adon. Yeah, for how much he'll mean for the defense too. From Jay Melvin, Brian, you've mentioned this before, but you could go more into this. How far do you think Ole Miss is going to fall this year? Do you think they go 7-5 or worse?
Let me pull up their schedule here real quick. Let's see here. So here's a couple things about Ole Miss. Number one is, I've said this a bunch of times, I don't care what a team is with an interim coach at the time. That's not what you're evaluated on. It's the same thing with backup quarterbacks. How many times in our history have we seen a backup quarterback come in off the bench, play great, no pressure, and then he either signs with another NFL team as a free agent? You think Matt Castle, Scott Mitchell. I mean, we could go down this long list of guys, and then they end up just not being that good. Rob Johnson for older folks, with the Bills. Same thing with backup college quarterbacks. Remember how good people thought Chase Bryce was going to be because how good he looked coming off the bench against Syracuse when Trevor got hurt? Then he goes to Duke, and he's not very good. And then he goes to, like, Appalachian State or something, and he's just kind of okay. Right? Because there's no pressure on the backup quarterback when he steps in as the backup quarterback. And I think the same thing is true for the head football coach. Everything about last year's team was built around the leadership of Lane Kiffin and that staff. It's like the 2015 team. When that offseason was built around Malik Zaire as the leader of the team, that team played differently than the next year when their leadership was built around Deshaun Kaiser. Now Deshaun was able to take advantage in 2015 of the team that Malik had built. But when he had to do that team wasn't nearly as good. And I think that's true of head coaches as well. Now, there have been some head coaches that step in and they do well on an interim basis and they keep their job. And then there's other coaches that step on an interim basis and they win some football games. And when they become like the guy, the success is not nearly as great. And that's just, that's the reality of it. So I think that's a big part of how I look at it. And I'm not a big Pete Golden fan. Then you look at it, Trinidad Chambliss comes back, Kewan Lacey comes back, but they lose Trey Wallace, they lose DeJon Stribling, they lost Caden Lee, who transferred to, I think, Missouri. They lost some other young players. They do bring in some portal guys, but Darryl Gill comes in as a good player. Deuce Alexander's back. I mean, they'll have some weapons, but they won't be as loaded as they were last year. They also lost Daquan Wright, I believe. Went to the NFL draft. They lost their 2 tackles. They do bring back a lot of interior guys. Defensive line-wise, bringing back Will Eccles, he's a really good player. Cam Franklin's a pretty solid player. They brought in some good portal players. Blake Purchase is a nice player. I just don't think the talent on the D-line is going to be nearly as good as it was last year. Linebacker, Suntarine Perkins is basically an edge rusher guy. TJ Daugherty is gone. Again, they had to refill with portal guys. Their secondary brings back a decent amount, but their secondary wasn't very good last year. That was the weak part of their team. So I don't know. I just don't think their talent level is as great as it was. I think last year was a bit of a, they took advantage of it being a down year in the league. So how far they fall, part of it's going to be determined by what they do in the opener against Louisville. But, they play at Texas as a loss, at Oklahoma as a loss. I think Georgia at home is a loss. Then it's how do they do at Florida? How they do at home against LSU, how they do at Vanderbilt, how they do it at Louisville on a neutral field. But the other thing too, Trev, about last year's schedule is I think they benefited from a softer schedule. They had one good win last year. That was over Oklahoma. LSU wasn't very good. They didn't play Bama. They didn't play Texas A&M. They didn't play Texas. They played Georgia, got beat, and then had a rematch against Georgia. They beat Florida in an uninspiring game. Like, they didn't play most of the best teams in the SEC last year. Barely beat Arkansas. They don't have that advantage of a softer. I think this is an 8-4 team this year.
Here's where I'm at with Ole Miss, Jay Melvin. One of the things that doesn't get talked about enough nationally about Ole Miss last year is how many close wins they had. I mean, they beat Arkansas by 6. They beat LSU by 5. They beat Washington State by 3. They lost to Georgia by 8. It was a one-possession game on the road against Oklahoma. There's a lot of those games that I don't know if they win if Lane Kiffin's not their head coach, because I don't have faith that Pete Golding's going to do it. Now, the counter to what I'm saying is, well, he won a close game in the playoffs against Georgia in a 5-point game. Sure, fair enough. But that was a game where I give more credit to Trinidad Chambliss putting on the Superman cape than I do Pete Golding. And so is Ole Miss really going to be in a position where they're asking Trinidad to put on the Superman cape to beat Washington State by 4?
Right.
Are they going to be asking him to do that this upcoming season? I mean, look, we're not going to have to wait long to find out about Ole Miss. They play Louisville in the opener on a neutral site, and then on September 19th, they host LSU. I will know a lot about Pete Golding's chops before September's even over.
And
so we won't have
Florida
to
the week after LSU, Trev.
Yep. We won't have to wait long.
Yeah. Agree. I just think last year was a lot went right for them last year, and I don't think it's repeatable.
Another one from Jay Melvin. Notre Dame is getting a visit from Tyler Alexander this week. Do you like him, Brian? Do you think the sites underrate him? And do you have him rated higher because he has some big offers?
So just so we're clear, like I like every player that's good enough to get a offer from Notre Dame. It's to varying degrees. So you ask if I like him, of course, he's got a Notre Dame offer. It means he's a pretty good football player. As far as ranking goes, I think he's a 4-star player. I think he's a borderline top 250 kid. He's a good football player. He fits a lot of that big plugger type of guy up the middle that Notre Dame likes. As far as how he ranks for me, he ranks below Marcus Fakatu, David Fuller-Ronshu, Braden Parks by a bit. Those are all top 100 guys in my ranking. He's more of a borderline top 250 guy. If they got him, I'm happy. It's good. You got that big-bodied kid. But I think what you're getting is you're getting more of a – I'm trying to think of a player comparison for him. But you're getting more of a – not style of play, but you're getting more of a Myron Tungavaloa, Mosa, Kurt Heinisch, like good football player. Not a someday I think he's going to be a first-round draft pick, at least from what I see. I just don't think he has quite the explosiveness athletically. Now, again, he's not the same player as Donovan, as Kurt and Myron stylistically. I'm trying to say the level of impact. Those are good football players, Trev. Those were good football. Kurt Heinisch has started games in the NFL. Those are good football players. But there's those guys, and then there's Jerry Tillery, Lewis Nix, Capron, Lewis Moore, Riley Mills, that kind of guy. All good football players, all important to your program. But one guy's a difference maker. One guy's just a good, solid, heart and soul of your team, but not the difference maker kind of guy. And that's more of where a guy like Tyler Alexander would be for me.
It's a good comp.
Yeah. Here's one. Salty said, which member of the 23 class has had the most success after transferring to another school? There's only really 3 that have done that so far, right, Trev? You've got Braylon James, Rico Flores, and Sam Pendleton, correct?
Yeah, of the 3
else transferred this offseason.
Yeah.
Correct? Ben Minnick transferred. Micah Bell, that's 4. Preston Zinner transferred this offseason. None of the offensive. Sam Pendleton, as I already mentioned, but Jordan Faison or KK Smith didn't transfer this offseason. Kenny Minchie. Braylon James hasn't done anything at TCU. Rico Flores got off to a good start at UCLA and then got hurt and just hasn't done anything really since then. So he was probably the guy that had the best, he had the best start. Rico in the first 4 games at UCLA had 12 catches for 187 yards in 4 games. And then got hurt, missed the rest of the year, and then came back last year and didn't do a whole lot.
Yeah.
So I'd probably say, and Micah Bell hasn't really done anything since he transferred. Braylon James hasn't done anything since he transferred. I'd probably say Sam Pendleton so far has had the best career so far since leaving Notre Dame. Now, who will it be this year is going to be the more interesting question. Is it Kenny Minchie? That's where I'm leaning. Is it KK Smith? Is it Preston Zinner? Is it Ben Minnick? So a lot more options after this year than we've seen in the past. When it's all said and done, my prediction on which guy that left will have the most success, my prediction is going to be Kenny Minchie.
Same.
but we'll have to see. We'll have to see. To be honest with you. And then the last one, Trev. Actually, there was one from. No, I think that'll actually. Let me see here. That'll do it, man. That'll be it for today's mailbags. So there. Oh no, there was one more. There was one more from Archer that I wanted to get to. I thought there was one more that I wanted to get to. That would be it.
From our guy Archer, who is the most important Notre Dame player who isn't getting a lot of preseason love? Follow up: which unknown, quote unquote, unknown Notre Dame player is most likely to be an All-American by the end of the year?
Who's the most important Notre Dame player who isn't getting a lot of preseason love?
Oh, I got mine.
Go, give it. Let's hear it.
Will Black. I'm riding the starting left tackle train. Nobody's talking about him as a guy stepping into the starting lineup with a super high ceiling, which is odd because a lot of these major services like to go based off of what the recruiting rankings were, and Will Black was one of the highest rated recruits in the 2025 class. It is
apparently not every magazine even knows he's playing left tackle.
That's very true. That's very true. It's probably because they're too busy thinking about Sullivan Absner at right guard, allegedly. So wherever they had him.
It was Absner Sullivan.
Ah, good.
Yeah. Not even Absher. Absner Sullivan was his name.
Okay. Well,
yeah.
There's that.
See, the reason I don't go there is I just think if he's just solid, they're fine there. I think that more is needed from Bryce Young. Like that would be one for me. Like, I think you need Bryce to be a dude this year to some degree. I would say that. I think that you could look at Mylan Graham, Jaden Greathouse, one of those two receivers stepping up that aren't getting a lot of preseason love. Maybe Quincy Porter. That might be one that I would go with. And then another guy that I'll is one of Christian Gray or DJ McKinney. I think it's a big one as well. Those are ones. And honestly, yeah, those are ones. Those are ones that I would go with.
I'm shocked the Ohio State transfers aren't getting more love nationally. Truthfully,
the only time I've heard them mentioned was like almost like sarcastically from JD Pickle.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, because the thing is,
let me say this. I'm sorry to interrupt you. It was the debate. He was like, we know more about Miami than Notre Dame, which is absurd. He's like, well, who's their leading receivers? 2 transfers from Ohio State. Like it was like an insult. And I'm like, are we going to pretend like Notre Dame doesn't have 2 guys that have like balled out in the playoffs? Like, are we going to forget that their leading receivers the last 2 years are still on the team? Like, what are you talking about, dude? You're saying that says more about your knowledge of Notre Dame than it does your knowledge of football in general. It tells me that you don't know what you're talking about. And so you're just trying to play contrarian. But to say you know more about Miami than Notre Dame, you can think Miami's going to be a better team. I'm fine with that. But to say you know more about them is, to me, nonsense. Nonsense.
It's just crazy. It's because those 2 guys went to a school. You have a school like Ohio State that has been called a wide receiver factory, which I agree with. This isn't a shot at Ohio State because I think they've produced really great wide receivers at a very, very high level. But you have 2 guys coming from a school like Ohio State going to Notre Dame, a school that nationally people don't recognize as a school that produces top-level wide receivers. If Mylan Graham and Quincy Porter went to Georgia, or if they transferred to Bama, if they went to Clemson, if they went to Oregon, that's all people would talk about. But because they went to Notre Dame, there's a notion that they just aren't good players.
Or not difference maker, like immediate difference makers.
Yeah. That's what it is. And then what quote unquote unknown Notre Dame player is most likely to be an All-American by the end of the year?
Apparently that's Gerby Lambert.
I guess.
I mean, I would have assumed that everybody knew he was going to be a dog this year, but apparently he's getting no preseason love. So apparently Gerby Lambert's an unknown to a lot of college football. Mm-hmm. So that's an easy one. Like I honestly was shocked. I was expecting him to be getting preseason love. Andrew Gilmore had a good one. Aeneas Williams. As far as the most important Indy player who isn't getting a lot of preseason love, that's a good one. I think they had like top 20 running backs in college football, and Aeneas wasn't in there, which, I mean, I get. He had 224 rushing yards last year. I understand, but yeah, that's an interesting one.
Yeah, the unfortunate thing with Aeneas is he's just following up Jeremiah Love, and so naturally anybody's just gonna ignore.
And he's got
who
what,
that guy is.
445 career rushing yards? Is it? So I
Yeah.
get that one. I'm not even complaining. And that whole time we were like, I can't believe Aeneas Williams is not anybody. No, I'm not. That's dumb. That would be that. Okay, now you guys have gone full homer mode here at Irish Breakdown. You're now mad that a guy with 400 career rushing yards isn't a preseason All-American. Okay, now we've lost the plot a little bit here. We're not saying that, but this question is more about like that could be good that aren't getting that love. I don't think he should be getting a lot of All-American love right now, or preseason love. But I think that could change. Just like Jeremiah and we had this debate in 24. We kept telling people this running back room is going to be one of the 5 best in college football. I don't care that they don't have a lot coming back.
100%.
So that those would be mine. Those would be mine. Yeah, good question, Archer. Good show today. Good questions. Good chat. Appreciate y'all very much. Trev, you can take us out of here, my man.
Folks, that'll do it for us here in the afternoon show on the Irish Breakdown podcast, brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. I believe the guys are going live tonight on IB Nation Sports Beat. I got to make sure that they have a show scheduled. I thought that they did.
They do.
But
They are. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Show tonight, IB Nation Sports
Media
Beat.
personalities Notre Dame fans love to hate.
Love it. Love it. Follow up on their show from yesterday. Talk about the teams and coaches Notre Dame fans love to hate. So should be another interesting topic of discussion. Make sure that you tune into tomorrow's show where we have another fun, loaded midweek rundown. We're talking about, I believe, Notre Dame's all-opponent offense.
Yep. Tomorrow we will be talking about the all-opponent offense and the all-opponent defense. So we'll do our all-opponent shows tomorrow. And then we will also have our Rice preview tomorrow, and we will rank the 10 best players for Notre Dame on offense in the last quarter century. So from 2020 or from 2000 to 2025.
Love it. Definitely not going to want to miss tomorrow's show. On your way out of this show, be sure to hit that like, hit that subscribe, hit that notification bell, share this podcast with your friends, family, anybody that you know loves Notre Dame and college football as much as you guys do. Might be a hard task for some. The best way to support what we do here is subscribe to the premium message boards at boards@irishbreakdown.com. Until tomorrow, that's Brian. I'm Trevor. We'll see you back here very soon on the Irish Breakdown Podcast.